All right, welcome everybody. We're going to get started. I want to officially welcome you to the FlexRide Milwaukee Symposium, Connecting City Residents with Suburban Jobs. This symposium is about the flexible on-demand microtransit service called FlexRide Milwaukee. It currently connects workers on the north side of Milwaukee with employment sites in Menominee Falls and Butler. My name is Bob Schneider. I'm a professor of urban planning at UW-Milwaukee. I'm currently the principal investigator for the FlexRide Milwaukee project, which is funded by the National Science Foundation. Thank you so much for attending this afternoon. We have about 100 registrants for this event, including people from at least 5 other states, including California and New York. So welcome to all of you who are in the room, as well as all who have joined us online. Why did we bring everyone together? Well, 1 year ago, FlexRide didn't exist. Since the service launched in March, FlexRide has provided approximately 7,000 rides. Just last week, it set a weekly ride record with more than 100 different people taking 534 rides. Up until September 30th, people needed to participate in our National Science Foundation study to use FlexRide, which involved completing, let's just say, a fairly involved survey. And even with that barrier to participate, just over 1,000 people applied, 700 people were accepted, and then 400 people applied the code to use the service. So those numbers also represent people, such as the rider who said, it can help me get out to places I've never even thought about working. And the driver who said, a lot of people tell me they're so grateful for FlexRide. I think it's a blessing. So clearly there's a demand for FlexRide Milwaukee and the service that they provide. So we think it's worth taking a step back to share information and have some discussion about how FlexRide Milwaukee was established, ridership trends, how it's met needs of workforce and employers, and how FlexRide compares to other microtransit services around the country, and how it might evolve into the future as well. We'll do this through a series of panels that are outlined on your agenda. During the afternoon, we'll have 2 short breaks of 5 minutes each between several of the panels. And before we get started with the program, I want to thank some very smart and dedicated people who've been instrumental to establishing FlexRide Milwaukee, many of whom you'll hear from soon. First, Eric Brooks and his team from Carl Collective, who, along with Eric Lynn from SewerPack, set up this event right here that you're at. Really appreciate the planning and execution today. Mobilize is led by Dave Steele. They're pursuing better multimodal options in our region and really had been some of the first groups to promote the idea of flexible microtransit. And so they help plant the seeds for this idea. They're also leading what we like to call FlexRide 2.0, which is the expansion and sustaining the service into the future. Thanks to the Civic Mobility Coalition that we worked with, which included key businesses, employment organizations, workforce organizations in Milwaukee County and in Waukesha County, as well as transit providers, including MCTS and Waukesha Metro Transit. I want to thank Lingxian Hu, or Ivy. She won the NSF grant, $1 million, to get this FlexRide started out. It wouldn't have happened, or wouldn't have happened so quickly without that grant being won. This is Ivy's specialty in her research, and she was the one who brought the money here to Milwaukee. SewerPack, Southeastern Wisconsin Regional Planning Commission, they are our civic partner in this National Science Foundation grant, and FlexRide Milwaukee definitely would not have happened without all the work that they did. Kevin Muse was the executive director when we started on this. We had incredible help from Eric Lind, Celia Rueda, and Jennifer Sarnecki. I just want to say, too, as an example of what they did, they went above and beyond. Eric and Celia, for example, were watching their phones on Friday night at 10:30 this summer to make sure that some of the riders who were coming back from their work had rides in Menominee Falls and Butler on a Friday evening at 10:30. And, you know, that's not typically what we do in our day jobs, but they were making sure that those people had their needs met. And then finally, thanks to the Wisconsin Black Historical Society and Claiborne Benson and his team for hosting us today at this great venue. As we go along through the afternoon, take a look at everything that's around here. Also help yourselves to food in the back. And so thank you so much for hosting us here. And with that, I'm going to welcome Claiborne Benson to say a few words.
Hello, I'm honored to present to you and to say a few words. Thank you. Claiborne Benson is my name. I'm the executive director and the founder here at Wisconsin Black Historical Society. I am happy you're here. We do tours and we do family reunions. We do genealogy here. We do kids tours. We've been in existence for 35 years, and so please feel free to come back and join us. I'm mindful of this whole idea of transportation and the importance of it. Most of you have heard and know about the efforts for the Milwaukee Transit to run buses to the Waukesha area, simply because the businesses and the foundries that exist in those areas. And those areas also had the kind of jobs that African Americans in this area can do without difficulty. And transportation has been a very important part of the African American community. You may not have heard of this man's name. His name is Bill Mosley. Bill Mosley was from Mississippi. He came up in the early 1940s. He could not read or write, and moreover than that, he could not even drive a car. But after working at A.L. Smith and then working at the docks, cleaning out the bottoms of ships that come in, bringing supplies and such, he acquired an interest in union activities and went on to control the docks, the importing of material into southeastern Wisconsin, and led the fight for more supplies coming in through Milwaukee and the docks. He was a very important person. He organized other African Americans to be involved in the unions, and through the unions he gained control of the docks. Now, it's not as important today, but in the 1950s and 1960s, it was everything, and so that he was very significant. So that's just a small piece. Some of you were looking around at historical things. Bill Mosley made a difference in this community, learning how to read and write and learning how to organize union activities on the docks to make sure the supplies is brought into the various communities in southeastern Wisconsin. I thank you very much for your time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Claiborne. With that, we're going to start our first panel, which will begin with a presentation from Eric Lind, Ivy Hu, and myself. And then we will be joined by several other panelists who are listed in your program here. Chaitanya Brown from Employ Milwaukee, Rhea Shah from VIA, and Kevin Muse from the City of Milwaukee. We'll do our presentation slides first, so that you'll get some background about FlexRide Milwaukee, and then we'll open up to a Q&A discussion. So I'm going to kick off the presentation briefly with a few slides. First of all, we have a spatial challenge here that we're trying to solve with FlexRide Milwaukee. We know that the transit service in Milwaukee County is really excellent with MCTS buses. But we know that the service is mainly limited to the Milwaukee County boundary. However, over the last several decades, we've had quite a bit of job growth in suburban locations, which tends to be outside of the transit service area. And where there used to be a very large number of jobs within the city of Milwaukee, and in particular on the north side of the Milwaukee near where we are, many of those jobs changed or were lost over time. Some moved to suburbs, some changed through the way industry changed over time. So there are less jobs with an accessible distance to people who live within this community near where we are. During the 20-teens, there were some routes that were extended out into the suburban job centers. The dark blue areas on the map represent some of the areas with the higher employment in the suburban locations. But these were relatively inefficient for large buses to serve. Even though some people definitely relied on the bus and we had ridership on those lines, they were not as efficient as many of the other routes within the system. And ultimately, they were not maintained with funding. And so we were left with people who really needed to get to jobs in those suburban communities, but did not have access. So really that is what we call the spatial mismatch problem. At the same time, in the last several years, employers faced a really significant labor shortage. And so they really wanted to be able to access the many people who wanted to get to jobs in the suburbs. And so we had this dual problem that we think this type of microtransit could help solve. If you just think about the problem of lack of transit service, you might say, well, why doesn't everybody just drive their car out to these suburban job sites? Unfortunately, not everybody owns a car or has access to one or can drive one. And so we know that some of the neighborhoods within Milwaukee, especially on the north side, there are, in some cases, 20 to 40% of people who do not own a vehicle. And so we have high poverty and a concentration of people who really need access to jobs, which leads to a serious equity issue in providing job access. And so this type of flexible microtransit service is something that has been tried to not only provide access to jobs, but also address our equity challenges here in Milwaukee. We know through segregation over time that this affects communities of color more than other communities as well. So that is one of the main reasons why the National Science Foundation provided funding to support this pilot for FlexRide Milwaukee. And to hear more about the NSF project and how that got started, I'm going to turn it over to Ivy.
Thank you, Bob. I'm Ivy Hu, and it's so good to see so many partners, so many team members contributing to the project. As we open the presentation, this is a research project that expanding into a real-world long-term solution. And the reason that National Science Foundation would like to fund this kind of projects is to connect research, what we want to do theoretically and conceptually, with the real solutions for real people in the real communities. So I will just briefly mention the research components and how we connect that with FlexRide Milwaukee. So National Science Foundation first awarded us planning grant. So they want us to plan a pilot. And the planning grant, when we proposed it, we say we want to have a transformative planning process, probably differently from some of the conventional planning process. We want it to be truly bottom up. We want it to be truly engaged. We want to have the solutions that's proposed and developed and redefined by the actual users of the service. So it's really bottom up. What we did during the planning grant was that we recruited 2 groups of users for the new service. And the two groups, you can imagine, one group is the business owners. They need to transport labor force participants coming to the business, come to work. And the other side of the users is the labor force participants who would use the service to get to jobs. So those are the 2 user groups from beginning we have in our mind. From beginning, we seek their input, their proposed solutions. So we conduct meetings with them, and we designed what we call mobility solution or transportation solution. And then, fortunately, we got $1 million grant to implement the pilot designed during that stage. So the second phase was the full award, the implementation phase. Can we move on to the next slide? So this is kind of the visual presentation of the timeline of the lineage of the project. As said, during the planning grant, we talked to two groups of users, labor force participants and employers. And then we had 2 phases of meetings with them. I have automations there, so like, yes, here we go. And the next, can you click it again? So we have the 2 phases of meetings. When we say 2 phases of meetings, we're not talking about 2 meetings, because to engage, to talk to labor force participants, they're working full-time, they're working during weekdays and weekends, so we actually have different meetings at different time during one phase, so that we get to expose, we get to engage with labor force participants. We also want to say that our planning process is really bottom-up. If you look at the 3 broad options, we said that during our planning phase. We come in, we didn't specify any, like, this is the proposal for you. We didn't specify that. We say there are some broad mobility solutions for you. Please see which one is preferable, is feasible for you. So we proposed very broad options. We didn't even say this is gonna be transit, this is gonna be Uber, this is gonna be shared bikes. We didn't even say that. The 3 broad options, one is on-demand, door-to-door service. It's Uber Lyft-like, but everybody understands it's very expensive, but most convenient. The second broad option is that on-demand service that connect predetermined stops, so we call microtransit. It's closer to home, and then connect that with business or organization. So people can understand, everybody understand that it's medium speed, because we need to get to the predetermined stops. It's not door-to-door, supposedly, but it can be a little bit cost-effective. It can be cost-efficient than the first option. And the third option is what we usually call first last mile connection. So supposedly labor force participants take the bus and get to the closest bus stop, then use the on-demand service to fill in the last mile gap. So that was what we did, 3 broad options that eventually labor force participants and the business group, they choose the different options. Essentially, labor force participants chose the second option, and business owners and business managers chose the third option. And it will be pretty clear when Eric shows the service design. Anyway, so we won the award and we did the pilot, and this is FlexRide Milwaukee. We soft launched FlexRide Milwaukee in February and redesigned the service in April. And by June, where is Dave? Dave and Mobilize won the WIG award. By that time, we know we are successful. We are continuing the service. So by the end of September, we lift the restriction by the research component. So we move away from research component and move into the post-pilot service, FlexRide Milwaukee 2. So then circling back, because we're bottom up, because we truly engage all the users of the service, and there are some other additional research questions we want to ask, whether our project is successful and how to make it even more successful down the road. So in the research project, we ask how big is the potential market for microtransit service in Milwaukee. We know microtransit is gonna happen, is happening, and do we have a market for that? How to connect with the current transportation services? What are the challenges to establish FlexRide Milwaukee, and what lessons have we learned? You can imagine for a region-wide mobility service, when we have MCTS, when we have different transportation services, when we have business organization, when we have labor force organizations, FlexRide Milwaukee does involve a lot of partners, and these partners want to solve a problem, a issue that we haven't solved for many years. So we do face some of the challenges, and I think we learned pretty good lessons for the success of FlexRide Milwaukee too. So who are the FlexRiders? During the research project, even beyond the research project, what are the social demographic characteristics? whether FlexRide Milwaukee service actually helped them. We also have additional research questions that we'll probably talk down the road. Now I'll turn it back to Eric, and Eric will talk about the partners and how to get the project going.
All right, thank you, Ivy. And a special thank you to Bob Schneider and Ivy. As Bob mentioned, Ivy was instrumental in getting both the planning grant that we went through that process last year, and then this year in going through the pilot program. As Bob said, it wouldn't have happened without Ivy's leadership in that. And now I'll talk about some of the other partners that FlexRide also would not have been possible without. So obviously SewerPAC and UWM have been the sort of the lead partners in this effort, funded by the National Science Foundation. Mobilize has been a convener and bringing people together to move along the multimodal transportation conversation in our region. And as Ivy mentioned, Mobilize also took the lead on applying for a statewide workforce innovation grant, which will allow FlexRide to continue from the pilot phase to a more sustainable service. Employ Milwaukee helped us to engage job seekers who maybe would be able to get to additional jobs through FlexRide service. And Milwaukee County was helpful in getting to bus riders, helping to educate bus riders on the availability of FlexRide and the ability to reach additional jobs beyond where the bus service currently goes to. And as well, they helped us to sell vouchers to make sure that residents that are unbanked, that don't have a credit or debit card they can link to their FlexRide account, would have the ability to purchase fares for FlexRide service. Number of partners from the Waukesha County side of things. Waukesha County Business Alliance in particular helped to engage employers. I know Amanda Payne is here today, and we have one of those employers that have been engaged from the planning stage through the pilot, who will help to give the employer perspective on the service. And then the service has been powered by VIA since the beginning. And I think when we found out that we got the $1 million National Science Foundation grant, we had about 3 months to set up a brand new transportation service. And VIA was able to provide a turnkey solution and have been great partners in this effort to move FlexRide into the next phase. Next slide, Patrick. From the beginning of the pilot, there has been broad support. If you've followed the news stories, there have been great media stories on FlexRide and what it's meant to riders in particular. We did have a launch event early in March, which was really the kickoff of the official kickoff of the service, although we did start operating in February. And the mayor was there and county executive were there and talked about their perspectives on the service and how it can help their residents. We also had representatives from Waukesha County and employers, Ivy and Kevin, who were in the audience, trying to make sure that everybody in the Milwaukee area was aware of this service. And I think the launch event really helped to springboard ridership. We had a lot more people sign up right after this launch event. It was a critical component to the beginning of the service. So what exactly is FlexRide? I think Bob introduced it and said it's a micro-transit service. It's on demand. So essentially people are booking rides when they need them, like an Uber or Lyft type service. The initial funding from the National Science Foundation helped to get the pilot going, and now we have additional funding that we've obtained to continue the service. We talked about all the partners and how this really connects Milwaukee residents to the jobs in the northwest suburbs for now. Part of what we'll talk about later in the symposium is what the future holds for FlexRide, which will involve expansion to additional suburban employment centers. And then one thing that we did as part of the pilot was we had some eligibility restrictions. They were pretty simple. City of Milwaukee residents, adults 18 or older, and then either working or willing to work in the Menominee Falls-Butler area. So some basics on the pilot. On demand means, like I said, you book a ride when you need it. There's no advanced reservation for those rides, and usually a vehicle comes within 10 to 15 minutes, sometimes sooner, sometimes a little bit later if it's a really peak time. And we do have some pretty extreme peaks with this service I'll talk about a little bit later. Microtransit, so as Bob mentioned, running a 40-foot bus to some of the areas that we serve with FlexRide is really inefficient. So microtransit has been a popular concept for serving these areas. And being able to provide service with smaller vehicles makes it a little more nimble. You know, the service can be a little bit quicker in picking up maybe 3 or 4 or 5 riders at a time. Service hours, we've tried to encompass as many shift times as we can with the employers, and this has been a lot of back and forth with employers to figure out when they need the service. We initially started off with 5 a.m. to 9 p.m. as the hours, and quickly expanded those hours to cover some second, third shift changes. Fares, so one question that was asked as part of the pilot is, would riders prefer to have a free trip but have to get maybe closer to the employment zone? Maybe they have to take the bus or get a ride or something like that to get closer to the employment zone, or would they prefer to pay a fare and have service likely closer to their homes? And so that's one thing that we've weighed, and I'll show where those zones are exactly in a couple slides. And then the research component. Obviously, this is a research grant, a research pilot, so we surveyed riders, and as well we surveyed employers throughout the pilot to make sure that we were responding to feedback, and we did make changes to the service as we went through the pilot to respond to that. So how to ride. This is basically how you would ride, how you'd get started during the pilot, and the first step is no longer in effect as of the end of September, but a rider would apply, and as long as they met those pilot restrictions, being a Milwaukee resident and an adult, 18 or older, they would be given a code. They'd have to download the app or create an account and enter that code, and then they could start booking rides. And as you can see from the screen, if you're familiar with the Uber or Lyft type app, it's very similar. You'll see who your driver is, about when they'll arrive, what the fare is going to be, and then you'll be given information about the vehicle that the driver will be picking you up in. So here are the current FlexRide zones. The blue zone on the west side of the map is the Menominee Falls Butler area, and there are a few adjacent communities that have slivers of that community within the employment zone. And then the zones on the western side, the first zone is really our last mile, like traditional last mile zone for, not as many residents live in that area. We've seen, I think, about two-thirds of the riders actually ride from the easternmost zone. But the idea here with that green zone 1, the free fare zone, is people would probably have to get out to that zone unless they live within it or very close to it, and then they could get the rest of the way, that last mile or two, to their employer from there. And then the zone 2 is really more catered towards, I think what labor force said during the planning stages is that what they would prefer. They prefer not to have to travel out to get to that last mile zone, which is maybe preferred for employers, more of an efficient service. Labor force would prefer to be picked up at their home, right? If you're a resident, why wouldn't you prefer to be picked up right outside your door? And so within the zones, you can't see them necessarily, but there are points where we pick up, and it's essentially the nearest corner closest to where you're calling your ride from. So this was not the initial zone structure that we had for the service. We actually had 5 pickup points. A couple of them closest to the employers, and a few of them closer to where more residents lived. I think very quickly into the pilot, we made a pretty major change and went to a zone system both for the employment zone, but also for the residential more pickup zones. And so that's where we ended up with the model that we have now, which has been definitely preferred to riders. I think having to get out to the 5 points or having to get to those 5 points was a deterrent for some riders. And right now, as we're weighing the future of FlexRide, one thing that we're considering is how we can make this sustainable going forward. Is this zone system efficient from a cost perspective? And trying to balance that with the needs and preferences of the riders themselves. Just a note on being accessible to everyone. One of the goals of the FlexRide pilot was to make sure that everyone had access to the service. So we do have wheelchair accessible vehicles. Folks that don't have a smartphone are able to just call a number and basically do the same thing as you could with an app. And a customer support representative will help them book their rides, set up their accounts, book their rides, help with any issues that they have. And then making sure that folks that don't have a credit card or debit card, that they can link to their account and have the fare automatically taken out. We came up with a ride voucher that had a code on it, and riders would enter that code into their account, and they would that code would give them a credit on their account. And so Milwaukee County Transit System has actually provided a couple of facilities where those physical cards can be purchased. And also, we've added just recently that people can purchase a prepaid debit card, load cash onto that, and then just link that up to their account, so they don't have to have a credit or debit card. So how has demand been for FlexRide? Measuring demand has been, an ongoing process. Obviously, in the February-March timeframe, we barely had anyone using the service. But as you can see, service has continued to grow, and I think into November, we'll probably see an additional few hundred rides this month, probably setting a new monthly record, and we've been setting daily and weekly ridership records basically since, I think, August timeframe. October was definitely our biggest month, and I'll show on, if you can flip to the next slide. This is a slide that shows not rides, but riders, and so active riders, the darker blue is the returning riders, so these are folks that have taken a ride in the previous month. The lighter blue is our new riders that have signed up, and you can see we continually added new riders as we went, and then on September 30th, we stopped requiring people to apply to join the pilot and get a promo code and enter that into their account. We relaxed the eligibility restrictions, and in October, we saw essentially a doubling of riders using the service. Close to 80 people signed up, new riders signed up in October, and we've really, I guess, taken off in terms of ridership since then. So sort of the flip side of the ridership growth is the reduction in cost per rider, and cost effectiveness has been a metric that we've been tracking very closely. I think when you're talking about replacing bus service with something that's more flexible, a microtransit service, you've got to look at, is it actually efficient from a cost perspective? It's very difficult to benchmark this, but as you can see, the cost effectiveness has been growing, or has been improving month after month. We just got underneath $50 per ride in October, and I think it's lower than that now. And we're continuing to work with our partner VIA to try to bring that cost effectiveness, or that cost per ride down even further as we go. All right, this is my last slide, and then I'll hand it over to Ivy for some more detailed look into the research component. But we had over, I think, 700 accepted applicants from the beginning to the end of the pilot. Over half of those applicants were, as you would expect, unemployed and looking to use FlexRide to get to a job that they maybe couldn't get to otherwise. Over 80% African American. And if you know anything about the demographics of the Milwaukee area, the areas that we are serving with FlexRide, there is a high concentration of African Americans in those residential areas. About 60% were female, 40% male, and about 60% were from low-income households, so less than $1,500 a month. And almost I would say 9 out of 10 applicants said they didn't have access to a car. So I think Bob mentioned, one of the things that you're looking at through this pilot is people that can't actually, either they can't drive or they don't have access to a vehicle to get out to these jobs, and FlexRide has made it possible for those individuals to access more job opportunities. And then the unbanked population, about 1 in 5 applicants actually needed a way to pay with cash instead of a credit or debit card. All right, that's the end of my slides. So I'm going to bring Ivy back up and talk about some additional demographic, socioeconomic data, as well as some of the research conclusions.
Thank you, Eric. This is just to circle back on the research component, because our service designs were based on 2 groups of users and whether the service design really catered to the users. And this is a breakup by the people who travel back and forth between the employment zones and the free zone. When I say free zone, it's the zone that's closer to the employment zone. That's the last mile solution. That's option 3 in the initial planning grant. And then people travel back and forth between the employment zones and the pay zone, where people need to pay $1.50 to get to and back to work. Anyway, so essentially, 2/3 of our riders actually use the pay zone. So it's a little bit further away from where the jobs are. It's mid-distance, and people need to pay, the labor force participants need to pay additional fare to 1.5 to use the service. We also look at the social demographic characteristics of the riders who use different zones, but we don't find significant difference in their social demographic characteristics. So gender, income, etc., doesn't affect how they choose where they use the service. Then essentially we believe, this is the argument that we get from the analysis, we believe where people live affects where they take the rides. This is no-brainer. It's closer to my home, so I'll take the service closer to my home. Just to visually show the residential location, the housing location of the riders. The blue bubbles are the riders who use the free zone. And most of the blue bubbles are close to the free zone or in the free zone. So I live in a free zone, so I just use the service directly there. And the orange bubbles are for the riders. Orange bubbles are where people live for those riders who use the pay zone. And again, the orange bubbles are close to the pay zones. And again, this is close to my home, and that's the reason I take the service directly from my home location. And you can see some purple bubbles, and those purple bubbles are the people who use both zones. So we haven't got into the details, but we suspect that some of the riders need to go to childcare, to go to drop off kids, then take the service from wherever. They drop off the kids, they go to groceries, then take the service from those locations. So then this is the hotspots for the trips. This is home to work trips. So this is the service for people who originate their trips from the residential location, and also the destination of their home to work trips, so where they go to work. And you can see in the middle part of it, close to the boundary of the county, there is a huge hotspot. And that's where that's a hotspot for the last mile solution, is in the middle of the map. And in the orange, in the yellow zone, in the pay zones to the right hand of the map, and you can see some scattered hotspots, and we believe that those are closer to MCTS buses or stops. So probably people potentially stop there via the MCTS buses and start to take service to work. And where they go to work, there are some hotspots also on the boundary between Washington and Waukesha County. And that's essentially FedEx, actually, and some other hotspots for employers. This map shows the same story, but it's just like the flip of the travel direction. This is from home to work, and the hotspot locations are relatively similar as home to work location. Commuting trips are regular, so coming back to work and going back home is similarly same route. Can we go to the next slide? And with this slide, I'll turn it back to Bob.
All right, so at this point, I would actually like to invite our panelists all up to the front of the stage so that we can hear from them and talk a little bit about some of the challenges and the lessons learned through this first phase of FlexRide. So please, Ivy and Eric, come on up, and then Chaitanya Brown from Employ Milwaukee, Ria Shah from VIA, and Kevin Muse from the City of Milwaukee. I think there's a way to get up the stage around stage left. So as you take the stage, some of the things that we have recognized is that it's a lot of work to run a transit service. And this is a transit service, microtransit service, that has a very particular purpose: to connect workers to jobs. There are other types of microtransit services throughout the country that take people to transit stations or to grocery stores or to other trip purposes, but this has a very specific purpose. So that's one of the things that we'll talk a little bit about in the discussion here. As we get started with the panel, if you panelists, when I ask a question, I'm going to ask the question to one of you first, and if anybody else wants to jump in and provide some thoughts, please feel free to do so. I won't ask every single panelist to respond to every single question because we want to make sure to get to all of you. But I'm going to start out with Chaitanya. how did information about the new FlexRide service get to community members and to people who are looking for jobs? So what role did Employ Milwaukee play, and were there other ways that word spread around about FlexRide Milwaukee? Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you for that question. As the Workforce Development Board, transportation always sits as one of our top 3 barriers to employment. So when we heard about the opportunity to partner on this project, it was a definite yes for us. We see individuals as the Workforce Development Board who come into us, whether they be low skilled to very high skilled, coming in, and one of the biggest things we see with employers, we service Milwaukee County, coming in, is we have employers who reach out from everywhere, and we know bus lines do not go, and so that's always kind of, even for us, a barrier to connecting the job seeker to the employer, is this obstacle of transportation. So our role was to seek out our network. So we have we have a coordination council, which is a network of workforce development agencies who play in this space of connecting job seekers to employers. We have a large faith-based following that we use as well. We created a web page as part of the partnership, a FlexRide web page, to promote the program, as well as using our networks. And one of the best ways of getting the word out is via word of mouth. We see that all too often. We can pay tons of money to market, but it's the experience of individuals who actually partake in the activity. We even went as far as to have our staff do kind of secret shopping. So before we began that process of promoting, we had some of our staff to become participants and to see, so that when we promote, we can tell you, you're going to need to do this, you're going to need to do that. We experience maybe some of the initial challenges in the beginning so that we can tell people and even give the feedback back of what we saw through the experience of our employees. And so we use every channel and still promoting, that's part of, we have a number of service providers throughout the county, and that's part of the goal, is to promote to the participants who are coming in this option of FlexRide. I remember being in DC and just being part of some conversations, and transportation was one, and seeing other cities kind of get into this space. I'm like, how come we can't do anything like that? And so, yes, this was a great opportunity for us, and as you can see, ridership has increased. Word of mouth continues to soar, and again, people are checking out our web pages and seeing the options, and then the expansion to the other locations has also been huge. We are telling employers, hey, this is an option, because they're saying, we're trying everything and we still can't get people. Having this as an option also helps in that space.
Awesome. And were there any particular times in the process over the last several months when you heard more of a buzz about FlexRide, where people were really interested or had brought it to your attention, even without you having to reach out to them?
Well, like I said, we've promoted it through our service providers, so participants saying, hey, you know what, I did FlexRide, I actually got the job, and I'm doing FlexRide. So we see peaks oftentimes. This is a peak time where you're gonna see with the holiday hiring, the seasonal hiring, where this is an opportunity where those numbers that you see October already peaking, you're gonna probably see even more significant peak, because now FlexRide is kind of in people's mouth. It's no longer this kind of hidden secret, it's in people's mouths, and it continues to be something that not only we're talking about, but our partners are also sharing.
Yeah. Well, thanks to you and to Employ Milwaukee for doing such a great job of promoting this. I want to turn to Kevin with the next question, and could you explore a little bit more about the other types of transportation options that people might have to get to jobs, and what's challenging about those? That might include Uber and Lyft, might include even taking a bike or other types of transit. And how does microtransit fill that niche?
Yeah, thanks, Bob. When we were exploring this initiative, and I work for the city of Milwaukee now, I used to work for the Regional Planning Commission, so not necessarily directly related to my role at the city, but When we were exploring this effort, I think that was something we were thinking about very hard, very carefully, was, what is the right solution? And of course, as Ivy talked about, we spoke to a lot of users, both on the business and the workers' side, to make sure that we could design something that would fit their needs. And in some cases, there are differing needs between those two different user groups. And so one of the things that I think the challenge with an Uber or a Lyft, and we'll still have to see with this cost per ride, because that is the key part that we're comparing to, right? Why not just subsidize an Uber sort of thing? But I do think, what we thought would happen and what seems to be happening, particularly with FedEx and with others, is that if you have too much of a concentration of jobs, an Uber or a Lyft is not an efficient service to get people to where they need to go, because there's too much demand in one location at a time, and the pricing becomes variable, as we know with Uber and Lyft, and so the price that people might have to pay becomes unknown. The other piece of it, of course, is just that price for the user. So you could come up with a subsidy of some sort, and we've seen some partnerships in the region, particularly before COVID with Lyft, where there was a subsidy for a certain amount, but again, that variability in price, that fell onto the rider, onto the worker. And so that unpredictability around that and just the affordability of that is a real limitation, I think, on Uber or Lyft. When it comes to maybe a fixed route transit service, there's nothing saying, as we've tried in the region in the past, that you couldn't have a bus serving these areas, but it might not be the best fit. A 40-foot bus, 30-foot bus really does best when there's fairly continuous development in a fairly straight line, and there's sidewalks and pedestrian facilities and ways to get to the front doors of the businesses, all kind of in a row as part of that corridor. And so we know as we get further into the more suburban parts of the region that is not true, right? We don't necessarily always have continuous development patterns. We don't necessarily always have sidewalks, particularly in these more business and industrial office park type areas. And so it becomes more and more of a challenge to come up with a regular bus route that works and that is efficient in those areas. And the flexibility of the smaller vehicles, able to pull into businesses' parking lots, drop people off at the front door, that helps address that issue for both the user and the operators as well. I think I already alluded to the pedestrian environment. I think that also applies to people maybe biking out to some of these locations, whether or not it's a comfortable place to bike, and then of course the distance that it may be from their home might be challenging too as well. Not that some people don't do it, some people do, but I think it becomes a smaller and smaller market that is able to do that then. So.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to turn to Ria from VIA. So the service provider, you do service for microtransit in communities across the country. So can you say a little bit about some of the more challenging or more unique aspects of the FlexRide Milwaukee service compared to some of the others?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. Really great question, and definitely like to ensure that we're not taking any sort of one-size-fits-all approach. So despite the experience that we have and some of the challenges that we've faced are ones that we were able to tackle head on. Things like how do we launch within 12 weeks, something that we've gotten very comfortable with needing to be able to do. Other aspects of the service definitely have been more of a challenge that it's just been wonderful to work with, all the partners that we see here today and really tap into this brain trust to get to the success of the service that we're seeing today. So two primary things that came to mind for me as I think about what was particularly challenging over the past 7-8 months of us working together. I'd say the first, the research restrictions that have been incredibly interesting also to learn about today and see those outcomes definitely posed some challenges from a service design perspective. So looking back in February or so as we were looking at ridership just not growing in the ways that we would want to, really reflected a lot on, okay, we've got this approach with these 5 different shuttle stops that can all be served as a pickup point in order to get to the employment zone. Does that actually make sense when you're opening the app? Is it really clear how can I use this? So we saw a bit of a drop off in terms of people forming an account, going through, all of the annoyance that we all feel when someone says, hey, download this app and do this thing, like, oh, I need to make an account and download this app and all these things. We were seeing people do that, but not actually riding. And that's where we really work together to figure out a way that we got to the service design that you see today that has been incredibly successful, seeing, even while we still had the access code restrictions on in September, achieving over 300 weekly rides over the 5 days of service, which was a really phenomenal accomplishment, and over 500 rides completed every week today. We were able to work with Ivy and the UWM team of how do we get to an approach that will make sense for the rider, but also ensure that we're still meeting the research objectives that were set out and that the grant funding was really looking at. So really pushed the thinking on that. The second area of just challenge that we continue to work through, and Eric alluded to this earlier, is really the peakiness of the service. So we have a few core employers that all understandably have very similar shift patterns. We have incredibly high demand in a few hours of the day. For instance, in the 1 p.m. hour, we're seeing over 15 requests, 20 requests coming in just that 1 hour. But in other pockets of the day, we're seeing fewer than 5 requests. So we tend to see on average 5 times the amount of demand in a peak hour versus the off-peak hours. So what we end up seeing is that in certain hours of the day, we have a really great cost per ride, one that really does rival what you could potentially spend on an Uber or a Lyft, sub $20, really where we'd want to be. But in order to have enough drivers available to meet the demand of that 1 p.m. hour, you need to have drivers online, understandably, in the 12 p.m., 2 p.m. hour, that sort of thing. That results in some of the some inefficiencies there. So now as we look ahead to this period of the service and looking ahead to FlexRide 2.0, something we've been talking a lot about is, okay, how do we open up to additional use cases? Still making sure that we are meeting the needs of this community, but being able to fill in some of that kind of peakiness, if you will, and ensuring we're keeping drivers engaged, keeping that cost per ride efficient, all of those sorts of things really needing to come into play.
And you mentioned the need to keep drivers engaged. Yeah. I was wondering if you could say a little bit more about the drivers. I don't know if we have any other, there aren't anybody else who's a part of the panels today who really can talk about the drivers, but can you say a little bit about their experiences and how you manage them from VIA's side?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have an incredibly committed group of drivers, and I think that's also been an area that we've been able to learn and grow over the past 7 months, is really having a group of drivers who absolutely love driving for this service. In speaking with the drivers, they really do have a connection to this community and the cause. They are members of this community. So it really is a phenomenal also employment opportunity for them. VIA's model is typically to pay drivers by the hour. And so even back in February when there were drivers were going, while ridership was still low and growing, riders were going almost their entire shift, not having completed rides or 1 or 2 completed rides. And if you were going to pay per hour, like some other rideshare services do, that would be a pretty tough opportunity to be offering. But VIA pays per hour, and one tactic that we take in order to keep drivers engaged, as you can imagine, I think any of us would not love to be online at 4:30 a.m. or 11:30 p.m. as you saw the service hours are. So one tactic that we're able to take is to really play around with this pay per hour model that we have in order to essentially incentivize drivers and make this be a really compelling opportunity and bring drivers away from other employment opportunities for themselves and work on average 35, 40 plus hours a week and really have this be something full-time that can be a livelihood.
Yeah, well, thank you. I want to turn to Eric now. Ria mentioned this, and Kevin did too, alluding to your graph about the cost per ride and how it's become more cost efficient over time. But how does this compare to some of the other types of transit services or Uber and Lyft that may be out there?
Yep, good question. It's a pretty graph, right? I mean, the the direction of the graph is great, and it's heading in the right direction. You know, there's a lot of factors at play when you're trying to figure out the cost effectiveness of the service. As Rhea mentioned, it's been very peaky. There are certain employers that are really taking advantage, and the word of mouth within that employer really spreading the demand. And so we have really good cost per ride numbers during those peak times. And then there's a lot of efficiencies that we can still find between those peak times. And then I think also there's a big opportunity when we look at expansion. We know that there are employers in certain parts of the region. We talk about Franklin or New Berlin, other parts of the suburban communities in the Milwaukee metro area, where we know that there's a lot of demand. And so I think there's some opportunities there. You know, as you expand and scale up the service, you can make it more efficient because you can play around with how many drivers you've got on the road in the service. But benchmarking against different services is a very difficult task. There's a lot of apples and oranges pieces of that comparison. Like if you looked at the MCTS service, some of their core routes, and they're sub $10 an hour or $10 a ride, or even better than that. You know, you can't compete with that with the distances that we're traveling and the type of service that we're providing. And you look at some other services across the country, they might be in that sort of MCTS type of cost efficiency, but they're providing a lot more service, and they've basically taken advantage of microtransit to replace a lot of their fixed route service and things like that. And then there are others that have been around for a while, and they're higher than the current cost per ride that we have right now. So we've tried to play around with what sort of the golden number is, and we've thrown out, I think Bobby threw out a goal of $25 an hour. We didn't reach that for the pilot, but we're getting close to that. I think it's just a matter of trying to find efficiencies and making sure that it is competitive to the alternatives out there. Providing Uber and Lyft rides for everyone is hopefully we're more cost effective than that going forward.
Yeah, go ahead, Kevin.
Add something to this too, which is important to think about when you're looking at the cost per ride, is the level of service you're giving to the rider. This is we're traveling fairly long distances for a good chunk of the riders, as Ivy's data showed, and you're giving people pretty responsive service. They request a ride, they get a trip pretty soon after they request, except for during the very highest demand areas or time periods. And then you are taking them basically, in many cases, it looks like from the corner closest to their home, right to the front door of the business. And so we can talk about, or you can think about from like a societal perspective, if that's the sort of thing we should be subsidizing to this degree or not. But that's the other thing playing into the cost per trip when you compare it to fixed route or anything like that, is you're also providing a really customized and high value service for those riders. So.
And I'd also say at a very low cost for the rider themselves as well.
Of course,
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, to follow up with another factor related to this is how many people are riding within the same vehicle. And so this is a service that allows rides to be shared. I was wondering if you could talk about that a little bit more in terms of how often we have had shared rides and how that contributes to the user experience. Have we heard anything about that from riders? And could that be one way to keep the cost per ride down if we have more people sharing vehicles?
I can kick that off. I think you maybe have looked at the data as well. Initially, obviously, we're providing individual rides at the level of ridership that we had. And so some of our riders that were with us in March, April, May, and got used to that solo ride, and that, as Kevin mentioned, is a very high level of service when it picks you up at the corner and takes you to the front door of your employer. They got used to that, and we sort of had to re-educate them on the purpose of the service. It's not to give solo rides. That's not an efficient model. And as ridership picks up, you're going to have to expect to have a shared ride. People getting picked up on the way to your employer. So there was a little bit of an education phase there, and I think we put out some pretty good communication to explain that and set realistic expectations for everyone. But that it's a challenge. People aren't used to, I think, the newness of the service. People aren't used to the FlexRide type of service in our region. This is the first time really something like this has been tried. And so there was a lot of learning in a lot of different aspects, and that was, I think, one of them.
Yeah, we recently even opened up the front seat of the vehicles to enable sharing. And in some of those peaks of the day, we are definitely, sharing is definitely the norm. So definitely making use of the full size of the vans in those peaks to make them as efficient as possible. What I'd also add is to Kevin's point, some of the aspects of the service that also make it really appealing to riders can also sometimes harm the ability to share and aggregate. What we tend to see at VIA is the longer the trip, the harder it is to actually really efficiently aggregate that and ensure. You would think that it makes sense that, it's really long, you can easily pull off and find riders, but we've tended to find some pretty counterintuitive results there in terms of also just making sure it's a really good experience of getting that rider to work in the most kind of efficient path as possible. So one tactic, for instance, that we'd like to at least explore is things like distance-based pricing. If you're going to go from, the full southeast corner all the way to your employer in the far northwest, that potentially needing to cost more because that is a trip that's typically a little bit harder to aggregate as well.
Yeah. And that leads me to my question for Ivy, and she explained the differences between the zones that people were choosing, and mainly it was people choosing a zone that was close to where they lived. So I'm going to switch up my question with you a little bit here on the fly and just say, since you explained it so well in the presentation, what do you think might actually get people to shift to a zone that's further away from where they live? In other words, the people who are currently living more in the central city, to get them to shift towards that free zone. What sorts of changes could be done to a service to do that?
And actually, we've talked about it. Is it working? Is it working? Yeah. We actually talked about it during our planning phase and in our discussion with VIA and MCTS, but because we had such a short time to prepare for the service, so we couldn't launch a lot of things that essentially is going to be very, very important for the future of microtransit. For example, the fare integration with MCTS. And of course, we couldn't do it initially in our 2 to 3 months planning period, but this is something, if we could work together with MCTS, then one M-card system can use on the buses, then that could reduce a lot of barriers for people to use FlexRide Milwaukee. And essentially, those distance-based fare system could be also incorporated into the whole region-wide transit fare system or something like that. That's one part of it, the fare integration. And the other part of it is like the service provision in terms of the app integration. Right now, for people to take the rides, they need to use MCTS, then open their phone and open the FlexRide Milwaukee app. If we have an integrated app system, that can reduce barrier as well. Anything else to add?
I think I was just going to echo what Rhea had said. I was going to echo what Rhea had said with sort of distance-based pricing, because we are getting pretty far away from the employer in the southeast corner of the riderships or pickup zones, we'll call them. We struggled with the terminology, what to call those zones. I'm going to call it a pickup zone. And so we did have, and we had riders there. There's a disincentive to ride from your home when you're in the southeast corner when you have a shared ride system, right? Because then you're more likely to pick up 3 or 4 or 5 more riders on your way. But I think that's something we're going to play around with as we plan for FlexRide 2.0 and see if there's any way that we can do that so that there is, I think when we look at the zones versus the pickup points, and I had a slide up when we were talking earlier that showed the 5 pickup points that we had. I think there's probably a hybrid of those 2 that could be pursued that would be the most efficient and balance that user experience with the cost. But that's something that will take a lot of time and thinking through to try to come up with the best model.
Great. Anything to add, Rhea?
The only other, I think these are all fantastic ideas. And the last thing that I would add as well, and something that we were talking about early this year as we were looking to evolve the service design, especially given that the initial service design of these 5 shuttle points were primary, correct me if I'm wrong, but primary connection points to the MCTS system. So we could still do the same today by saying that for these key transit hubs, the rider fare is lower or free or whatever else, to incentivize folks to actually use the system or use the service, really connecting with Fixed Route. And as we look to integrate with MCTS and be able to do all of that in one app, I think that also becomes a lot more seamless as well.
Well, thank you so much, first panel. That was really excellent. Let's give our panel a round of applause. Thank you, everyone. At this point, we have a 5-minute break. So, oh, sorry, 10-minute break. Yeah, 10-minute break so you can get a chance to grab some food, have some munches, and come on back in 10 minutes. We'll get started with our second panel at that point. Thanks again.
How are you doing? How's your new job? Yeah, good.
All right, so please feel free to continue grabbing some food from the back, but we are going to get started with our next panel, which is titled Meeting Employer Needs, Lessons Learned Engaging Employers and Understanding Their Workforce Transportation Challenges. I'm going to invite our panelists and the moderator for this session to come up. So first, our moderator is Jennifer Cernecki from the Southeastern Wisconsin Regional Planning Commission. Our panelists will be Dave Steele from Mobilize, Amanda Payne from the Waukesha County Business Alliance, and Craig Armstrong from ScanPack Manufacturing. So welcome.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and to the panelists, thank you for joining us. Now, similar to the last panel, I'll plan to direct a question to an individual, but please feel free to jump in and add any thoughts that you have. So my first question is for Amanda, and we know that the Waukesha County Business Alliance played a huge role in helping to get the word out with employers. Could you maybe share some of the strategies that you use to engage employers? And maybe just talk a little bit about what you were hearing from employers prior to FlexRide coming online.
Sure. So just a little bit of quick background for anybody that doesn't know. We're a countywide chamber of commerce in Waukesha County, so represent businesses from across Waukesha County and the region. In terms of what we're hearing from employers, the number one thing that we are hearing from employers every day, all day, is challenge to fill open positions. So the vast majority of our employers have open positions across every industry and really struggle to fill those. We hear regularly from employers and have heard for years in surveys, especially in the last 12 months, that workforce is the single biggest thing preventing our businesses from growing or expanding. That's the single biggest challenge that they're dealing with. So my team spends a lot of time trying to figure out workforce solutions to help meet our employer needs. So in terms of FlexRide, it was just a fantastic solution, and we really jumped at the opportunity to be part of the pilot. For us, we just are always on the lookout for really good solutions for our employers, but also regional solutions. So Waukesha County has a very low unemployment rate. There are only so many people to pull from, and our employers can only do so much stealing from each other, and we really need to widen that labor pool. So for us, it was a really, really good opportunity to be able to promote to our employers, here's the potential to be involved with a solution. So that was part of how I met Craig and ScanPack was just hearing from the first time I met with Craig. We talked about workforce challenges and trouble filling open positions. So we did that through a lot of different ways. So employer interest groups, one-on-one meetings with employers, promoting it in our newsletter, surveying. So lots of different ways to get in touch with employers to help tell them about FlexRide.
Great, thank you. And then my next question is for Craig, and I just wanted to note my colleague Celia Retta and I had the opportunity to come out to ScanPack and do a quick training with your staff, and they were super engaged and had great questions. But we just wanted to know also how FlexRide has helped attract employees and also retain employees. Has it had an impact, and what are you hearing from your staff?
So I think I'll start with how it's helped us to retain employees, because I think that's so far has been really the biggest win for us. We have a number of employees that ride share. Inevitably, there's car issues that happen throughout the year, and what we found is that as a result of those transportation challenges, people will be penalized for attendance and eventually could lead to termination because of attendance. And we have a number of employees now that regularly use the service who flicked from a ride share or using public transport, and not this ride share, they were sharing with their co-workers to really improve their attendance and retain their job with us. So that's really been a key win for us, and we continue to encourage employees to use this as a secondary option should they run into those challenges personally. The second thing that it does for me in terms of supporting the culture of our organization is to really help address things that many families are facing as key challenges. One of our core values is to think family. So for us, being a partner and supporting this program really helps to embrace and show our associates that we're really committed to helping those core challenges. From attracting new employees, I think the real benefits of this are yet to come in 2.0. Continue to expand that labor pool, the geographic areas that we can pull from. I think as the labor market maybe changes over the next 12 months, having this as a key benefit within our organization certainly increases the appeal for new employees coming to apply for jobs with Scanpack.
That's great. Thank you. So then another question, just kind of to follow up on that, in terms of lessons learned, in terms of what you've heard, have there been some feedback that you can offer for us in terms of what can we do in the 2.0 phase and how to improve things?
Certainly. It's been mentioned a couple of times, but I can't kind of emphasize it enough. The need for infectious advocates within your organization is probably the key marketing tool for any employer. Things that seemed certainly obvious to me up front were maybe not as obvious and not bought into until we had real-world riders using the service and having those lunch break conversations to say, hey, this is my experience, it's worked really well for me. That's helped to spread the word within our organization, far better than us handing out the promotional materials for sure. I think we also learned that there are challenges that our employee group face that we don't necessarily understand very well. So some of the things that we came into, and I know the program has been fantastic in addressing this, but walking to an area to be picked up in the dark for some of our employees is not something that they want to do, but from a safety and a security perspective, the ability to pay for the service, their financial background might not necessarily facilitate the ability to pay by credit card. So again, addressing that challenge has been really good. The need to expand the area into some of the areas that are geographic areas that our employee pool currently comes from is another great development for us. We have people that come from the south side and supporting those overtime requirements. They have a desire to work, but not necessarily have those transportation availability to them. And I think the final thing that I would say is the solution that we present to the employees has to be an easy and convenient option. As employers, what we're battling against is other employers, or at the worst case, do nothing. Right? So any solution that we come up with has to meet those convenience needs of the customers that we're trying to service, which is our employees.
That's very helpful. Thank you. I kind of want to build on that then in terms of how we can continue to engage employers. And Amanda, maybe just thinking about some of the comments that Craig made and other input that you've heard, how can a future FlexRide Milwaukee service really engage with employers, and how can we bridge that gap?
Yeah, good question. I would say in terms of engaging with employers, I really think that there are two different strategies, and one is retaining current employees. And so kind of, thinking about the lessons learned from people like Craig and other employers that were part of the pilot, which is more so marketing to your existing employees who are already working there, but maybe don't have reliable transportation all day, every day. So, understanding how to find those advocates and really market to your existing employees. I would say there's a whole separate piece, and one of the huge successes, I think, has been the partnership with Employ Milwaukee, which is trying to find new employees. So we have, employers that are hoping to retain their current employees because they've worked really hard to find them, but we have a lot of employers looking to add new employees to the mix. And so I think one of the really key successes for FlexRide is that it's a combination of a transportation solution and a workforce solution. So just in my 10 years at our organization, we've been part of many different transportation solutions. Some of them have been successful and some not so much because they were missing that workforce piece. So the transportation is really key, but then finding those workforce and hiring and job seeker partners to help our employers because, ScanPack can advertise open jobs all day long, but somebody like Shaitania and her team who really know how to find the job seekers and connect them and then making sure the transportation is there. So I think that's been really key to the success and I think really important moving forward. In terms of engaging additional employers, I have a very long list of employers looking to be engaged. They call regularly. They have heard about the service. They're excited about New Berlin. A lot of excitement about potentially Brookfield. We have employers as far out as Oconomowoc who would love to be part of the service. So I don't think there's a shortage of employers looking to be part of FlexRide 2.0, more so a matter of making sure that we've got the job seekers to continue feeding the demand.
Great. Thank you. So then, Dave, now I'll turn the question to you. Just kind of looking ahead again at next steps with the FlexRide Milwaukee service. It sounds like this will be a public-private partnership. So how can we really make this a value proposition for those new employers that may join the partnership and current employers that are already part of it?
Yeah, thank you. Absolutely, it's all about partnerships, and I think Amanda really hit the nail on the head here that FlexRide Milwaukee, it's an on-demand transportation service, it's a microtransit service, but at the end of the day, it is a partnership. It's Employ Milwaukee, it's Mobilize, it's SewerPack, of course, and really even beyond Employ Milwaukee to a lot of community groups via CDC, not via the transportation company, but via the local community development corporation. I see Cynthia here. It's really been the product of a lot of outreach, and outreach starts with listening. The National Science Foundation grant gave us an opportunity to really ask transit riders directly, what do you want to see out of a transportation program? And it seems like such a simple concept, but if we can design something that people will use on a regular basis, that's good for employers because, that's one less challenge, in finding workers. And Craig also mentioned, this is absolutely correct. I think a lot of times our employers, you might have an employee that appears regularly on time, there's no attendance issues, but you might not have any idea the challenges they face on a daily basis to get there, and that just presents challenges for your employee, it presents challenges for your business then, and, having somebody show up and ready to work and present, and, we asked the riders of the bus. I said, "What would you want to see out of a transportation system?" And they said, "Safe, reliable, cost-effective, welcoming." And really, at the end of the day, any one of us that makes a transportation choice, that's what we're choosing it based on, right? Is it safe? If it's not safe, I'm not going to want to use it. If it's cost-effective, I'll want to use it. If it's, convenient, I think of it as time, money, and hassle, right? If I can have as less time, less money, and less hassle as possible. That's one reason why the train to Chicago is so successful, because time, money, hassle, right? It's a lot easier to take the train down there. So, and our Flex Riders are no different. They're looking for that convenience and the ability to get there. So, we were able, FlexRide was able to really develop this program as a partnership. Those partnerships continue, they strengthen, and then the end result for the employer really is the product is, as Amanda was saying, not just a ride to work, but a lot of other things that go along with that.
Great. Anyone want to add to that or anything that you haven't had a chance to mention?
The one other thing that I would add in terms of lessons learned or things to think about in the expansion to 2.0 is just the understanding the types of employers that are a good fit for the program and making sure that we evolve the program so that it continues to be a good fit for small employers and large employers. And I think that speaks to some of what Kevin touched on in terms of the peakiness of the service. And, at the moment, FedEx is a huge user of the program, which is great because they're driving a lot of demand, but also making sure that it doesn't become a service that's serving just 3 really large employers. And so I think we've done a good job at that, but making sure that we continue to work with small employers who maybe are going to have 2 or 3 or 4 people taking the service, so that it is a good fit for those employers as well, I think is really important.
Excellent. Thank you. Those are all the questions we have, so we'll wrap it up there. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Yeah, actually, Jennifer, why don't we take a few questions from the audience, because people out there may have some questions.
Is there any questions from the audience about employers?
Hi, thank you so much. I just had a quick question, and I may have missed this earlier, but when you were talking about a perk for employees, were you talking that's paid for by the company? And I guess maybe I just missed the cost model right now in terms of where it started as the grant and where it is now in terms of how it gets funded. I know we saw the ride cost per ride, but who's paying the cost per ride right now? And if it's coming out of the company or if it's coming out of the grant? I apologize if I missed that.
Well, we took the decision as an organization to help subsidize it for our employees, mainly to get traction and get it off the ground. Going forwards, we'll have to evaluate that as the cost structure changes. But that was our approach initially through the pilot program.
Other questions?
Thank you. Yes, my question is there a process currently for what makes up a good employer for this versus maybe not at this point?
Yeah, I would say that has evolved through the pilot. So when we started, it was a lot of Q&A with the employer about what they're looking for and whether they would be a good fit and trying to really narrow it in. At this point, we're really open to any employer that's in that service area. So there's not a specific set of criteria that they have to meet. They have to be in that service area currently. We have also really tried to work with employers with some of the things that are best practices. So for example, we have a manufacturer that's in the service area. They have a very, very long hiring process. They're a defense contractor. There's a lot that goes into the hiring. That's a great fit maybe for existing employees, but maybe doesn't lend itself real well to trying to hire new employees, just because it's a very in-depth process. It's not to say they can't be part of it, but just kind of understanding like what are the best practices and which employers have had success with it. And then the shift times is another one. So we have a lot of manufacturers involved and some healthcare involved, and those are unusual shift times. So that would be, an initial screening question. They've got to have shift times that fit with the service right now.
Hi. A lot of employment paradigm is geared towards male employees, and I'm noticing that 60% of the participants are female, and there was a little bit, maybe I could have asked this question earlier, but childcare, like the multiple steps of the process, and to what degree are employers participating in things like flexibility, the kinds of things that female employees might need. Could you address some of those things related to childcare and transportation? Thank you.
Well, for FlexRide 2.0, and we'll be talking a little bit about, the next generation of FlexRide here, looking into 2023. But we are partnering with early childhood centers in Milwaukee to really position them as workforce mobility hubs. Now, I make sure to put those in quotes because we're not turning your daycare into a bus depot. It's nothing about like a physical upgrade. It's really more about a suite of services for FlexRiders that are working parents. And, that's the kind of creative thinking that comes out of partnerships. It was Employ Milwaukee, it was Julie Kao at Employ Milwaukee that really had that idea of, a ride to work is oftentimes a ride to childcare and then a ride to work. It's really 2 trips, kind of like myself this morning, dropping my kindergartner off at school and then heading to my first meeting. And you know, she brought this up in our conversations about FlexRide 2.0 and our Workforce Innovation Grant, and I thought to myself, of course. I mean, shame on me, frankly, as you know, a transportation professional for completely overlooking that. And I think we often you know, get caught in this rut of like, well, who is our customer? Well, our customer is the worker. Well, our workers are also parents, and they're you know, have full lives. And in fact, the majority of transit trips are not trips to work. They're trips to your grandma's house or to, you know, the park or just life, right? But this is a, you know, a workforce program, and you know, we're happy then to work with Employ Milwaukee and some of our high-quality childcare providers here in the city to really have it be a special, well, an added benefit for working parents.
For Craig or the other panel members, do you see some transition with some of the employees that are utilizing the FlexRide service to owning their own vehicles and commuting, or is this kind of serving as a primary mode of transportation over the long term?
So far from the feedback that we've got from our regular riders, it seems that this is their primary mode of transportation. You know, I think, well, if you've tried to buy a used car recently, it's not the cheapest thing in the world. So I think, you know, there are economic factors that further prohibit someone's ability to be able to invest in that. But I think it comes back to what I said before about this, you know, what's an employee's options and what's the easiest option for them. And if this becomes the easiest option, then that's the one that they're going to take, because it's reliable, doesn't take a lot of thought for them to use it.
The only thing I would add to that is I think the service is great because it is built to be okay with that if that happens, though. And so unlike a traditional fixed route option where, you know, if ridership ebbs and flows, even with seasonal employment or with people who do choose, you know, can and choose to buy a car after several months of employment, there's not a massive impact to FlexRide, whereas if the bus ridership drops, then you're, you know, running new routes or thinking about what the new routes are. And so that was a struggle that we had, especially in the New Berlin area several years ago, because we have a lot of really seasonal employers in the New Berlin area. And so running fixed bus routes and then trying to adjust for seasonality or people purchasing cars after 3 or 4 months of employment is hard to do. And I think the service is flexible enough that it can respond to that.
Hi, I was sort of thinking about this subsidy thing and employers subsidizing, government subsidizing, what have you. And, you know, we often forget that employers subsidize the cost of parking at their employment location. And you know, you're just one employer, but you said that you are providing some subsidy to your employers. Have you thought about, calculated how that subsidy compares to what it costs to provide a parking space for your other employees who come to work by their own car?
I haven't, but it's a wonderful thought. And now I'm going to go home and do it. But I think what you touch on there, and Amanda and I were actually having a discussion earlier, you know, things won't always be equal, but they should be fair, right? And I think that the point that you've raised there kind of touches on that we've got to make sure that as employers we're not creating an imbalance within our employee group. So thank you for that point.
Amanda, do you want to add to that?
No, other than we've had some conversations about that in the employer subsidy and the FlexRide 2.0. I think we have employers interested and willing to help pay for it, and, you know, companies that are already doing that themselves. We have had companies that are helping with, you know, subsidizing Uber or Lyft rides through their corporate model. So I think there's interest there from the employers and a willingness to contribute. It's just a matter of figuring out exactly how it works. So are they reimbursing the employees, or is that going through FlexRide up front? So figuring out the details of it, but I think there's interest and willingness there from the employer community.
One more question, if that's okay.
I thought of another question. Many of the younger people I know in their 18, 19, 20-year-old people in my family never want to own a car. They are really interested in a non-car structure future, and they aren't necessarily from this study area, but they live in the city of Milwaukee, and they are interested in these kinds of solutions. So totally outside of the scope of the study and whatnot, but like youth engagement, you know, do you have projections about young people using this service?
Yeah, that's a question that's come up actually quite a bit about FlexRide 2.0. So, you know, the National Science Foundation, we had to, you know, have the riders be at least 18 years of age. But, you know, in engaging with Employ Milwaukee and other workforce groups around the city and community groups around the city, that's a huge pool of, you know, potential riders are, you know, young people like myself when, you know, 16 years old riding the bus to work. That was my first access to jobs, you know, slugging it on Route 19 on the south side of Milwaukee to, you know, go down memory lane there. But yeah, it's a tremendous pool. And, you know, when you look at Milwaukee's bus riders, tend to be disproportionately younger than average. It's a young group of people. It is majority women, more than 50%. It's majority people of color. It's majority low-income individuals in our city, more disproportionately compared to the population as a whole. So, yeah, I think there's a lot to that. You know, really with any transportation service, the more people that ride it, the better. So really the long-term future of FlexRide, I mean, this is a workforce transportation program funded by workforce dollars through the state of Wisconsin. So that's where we're really looking to produce. But long-term, you know, really Uber and Lyft rely on, you know, rides to everywhere, whether it's to a Bucks game or to your job or your grandma's house or whatever. So, you know, long-term, I mean, we can look at how we, you know, make this a long-term kind of just part of Milwaukee's transportation ecosystem, and the 17-year-olds of today will be, you know, 45-year-olds like myself someday and still ride that. So.
Yes, thanks so much, Jennifer, Dave, Amanda, and Craig. Our next panel, we're going to take a quick 5-minute break before we get into it. We actually have an exciting opportunity to bring a couple of people in remotely to join our session today. And so we're going to get that set up and then bring the panelists in 5 minutes. So take a quick break. We'll be back in 5.
Peter? All right, so how we'll do this, everybody is here.
does not make any.
Just dial it in here and make sure they're on there.
All right, so our next panel is titled Comparing FlexRide to Its Peers, an overview of microtransit. And so as a part of this panel, we have a couple of colleagues from across the country who are going to be joining us remotely, which is really exciting. The moderator for the panel will be Peter Costa of HNTB. We'll have King Shen from the University of Washington present first, then Nick Klein from Cornell University, Tony Filippini from Des Moines Area Regional Transit Authority, and lastly, Patricia Kiewitz from Green Bay Metro Transit. So welcome, everybody. Peter, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Bob. And thanks, everybody, for being here, and also those tuning in virtually. And I hear this is also being broadcasted to the wide world, so it's very exciting to speak on this topic, bring a lot of perspective to the Milwaukee region, but also a much larger perspective with our panelists today to talk about their experiences, their efforts through academia, but also as a transit service operator as well. And I think there's going to be a lot of lessons learned for the Milwaukee community, especially when we keep talking about FlexRide 2.0 and what's in store, for the next generation of the program. Thank you so much for the introduction again. I will say that I had the unique opportunity to work alongside David Steele at Mobilize and Sewer Pack team on the last mile solutions study that happened right in tandem with the FlexRide program. So it was really interesting to watch that program grow with each month and learn from each other, at the same time looking at ways to develop more of a business strategy around mobility, providing more mobility options for the Milwaukee community, and to help really address those workforce issues which we just talked about. So it's really nice to just continue that dialogue and continue to hear that there's still much more to be done. And through that effort, we looked at different operating models, we looked at different business models from the employer perspective, workforce community, engaging the workforce community about their needs, which we talked a little bit, we heard just before this, but also standing up this program for the long term and really generating more buzz and accountability on the employer side to stand up something we like to call a Transportation Management Association or similar organization. So looking forward to hearing what's to come for the future with the program. So, and I think we hit this, we talked about this today at the symposium, and I just want to reiterate it that, workforce issues, it's not just a Milwaukee issue, it's affecting all of our metro regions and essentially across the United States. Mobility as a means, it's not a single solution, but it is a means to achieving these larger goals around workforce and economic development, but also social development. And that we need to recognize that technologies like microtransit, micromobility, and other kind of tech devices are tools that we have that will help achieve those long-term solutions and ultimately get to more sustainable modes of transportation. But I think it's also really important to hit on, and we heard it a little bit from Craig and others today, is that employers are getting more savvy and smarter about location, and that matters. When they look at their workforce and look at their needs, location is very important. To quote my friend and former colleague David Fields in the city of Houston, the best transportation plan is an even better land use plan. So I say that to really point, the Milwaukee region in that direction of looking at land use and where employers are located, where there's opportunity. I understand it's a competitive landscape, but it's also very important to understand, let's try to do our best to shorten that gap between your workforce and your location. And I think collectively as a region working together, we'll create this collective mutual business plan or collaborative business plan that would yield a lot of great results. So without further ado, I'm really excited to dive right into our panelist discussion that really bring a really perfect blend, a national perspective of academia. So we touched a little bit of that today and locally, but to hear other thoughts and perspectives from coast to coast. So I'm really excited to hear that, but also from transit service providers that are really on the ground right now, looking at their services and meeting the people, and how does that all relate to what's going on here in the Milwaukee region. So without further ado, I'll pass it over to King.
Thank you, Peter. Good afternoon, everybody. First of all, I want to thank the organizers of this symposium for your invitation. I'm so happy to be part of this discussion on an important topic. I want to say that today I come here with one message, which in some way is repeating the panelists in the previous panel talk about. That is the critical importance to assess the cost effectiveness of this kind of projects. And then I will show you some research results that we did using the Via to Transit case in Seattle to perhaps illustrate how this kind of cost-effective analysis could be done. So those are the two basic components. Okay, I want to say that this research was funded by the Transportation Research Center at the University of Washington for that region. It's called PacTrans. And the main person who did this empirical part of the study was my recent PhD graduate, Dr. Yiyuan Wang, who is now busy at his new job. And I also want to acknowledge that Casey Gifford, who is a planning professional in King County Metro in Seattle region, served as the co-PI of the project. Okay, so where did it start? We know it is important time to think about the future of the provision of mobility for the, especially the less advantaged employees and households. We know fixed routes is costly. A fixed route transit is costly, especially in low demand area. And we already realize, everybody here knows that we should and we are exploring new possibilities for low demand area, especially looking at on-demand services, new mobility services. But we needed to evaluate the cost effectiveness of any proposed alternative, such as what I called TMOD, which stands for Transit Incorporating Mobility on Demand. Okay, so the table here basically shows you some basic figure, a few years old, so nowadays the numbers should be somewhat higher. If you look at the system-wide average operating cost for buses in Seattle, it's $5 a few years ago. But if you look at the lowest efficient, 25%, all of a sudden it's $11. And if you look at the special services, access paratransit for people with disabilities, well, per trip, $61. So we needed to think about in what context incorporating new mobility service makes most sense. I just want to give you that context next. And the way we conceptualize this analysis is to think about what are the elements of transportation costs when we talk about cost effectiveness. So based on our understanding of the issue and the approach is this shown in this graph. I'm sorry, this is a little bit too dense. I know too small, so I will tell you what the main points here. First of all, focusing on the marginal part of the system, because for transit, we already said that central area is high efficiency, so you cannot use the existing average to be the basis for evaluating the cost for new service, typically at the peripheral area, new services. So in other words, we need to look at what we call marginal cost or cost for the marginal improvement of system. And then we also need to think not just the agencies, the providers' cost, but also users, which earlier our panelists also mentioned. So we need to account both service providers and the users' costs. Point number 3, for users, other than their out-of-pocket costs in the monetary form, we also know a large component is their time costs, which is related to the notion of level of service. So we need to be thorough. And to make the conceptual model complete, we actually also need to think about external cost. So environmental externality, accidents or crashes, so on and so forth, and the possible effect on existing bus services. No, okay. Yeah, next one. So in the case of Via to Transit, it's a first mile, last mile program. At least the part we look at with data pre-pandemic, that was first mile, last service, app-based, shared, and on-demand microtransit. It aimed at connecting riders to from one of the 5 light rail stations in south part of the Seattle area. And it's operated by Via using minivans, at least mostly. Riders pay standard transit fee per person, $2.75 per trip. And for our data, we look at the operation between April 16th, 2019 to end of February, year 2020. So pre-pandemic, and with that we got a total of 230,000 trip records through King County Metro. Okay, that's the particular service area we are looking at in our empirical analysis. It's called the Rainier Beach. That shaded orange area is where the demand is generated. And the light rail station is the Rainier Beach station. And for our illustration of our approach, we assume that riders in this area, they could always use regular fixed bus, but slower. And if you want to compare the service, then you need to try to develop scenarios of different levels of service for the fixed route buses, and then compare. Okay, next. And so we need to develop scenarios. We have 5 so-called counterfactual scenarios. The counterfactual is to say that if Via were not in operation in this zone, how would then be the alternatives for people to get to the station? So 4 of the 5 scenarios are about using the 2 fixed route bus line, but at a different level of frequency of service, reduce the headway to match the level of service provided by Via. And for comparison, we also put a driving alone as a comparison scenario. But in that case, the cost primarily, other than the user's cost, is agency King County Metro's construction of parking space, okay, provided to them. So that's how we look at it. And our simulation look at 1 day, yeah, that was a 1 day simulation, but many times of simulation. Next one, okay. And just to highlight that, of course, the total travel time per trip is shortest if you drive alone. But if you want to match Via with fixed route transit, you need to have such a high frequency of service. 5 minutes, 5 minutes, both peak, off peak. Okay, that's what it shows. So a lot of new, yeah, you can continue. A lot of buses need to be added. Okay, for cost estimation, two components: users generalize costs by looking at their time and monetary cost, and service providers, we get the dollar values from King County Metro. Okay. And for the construction of parking facility, we use their most recent estimated cost for investing in parking structure. Okay. Continue. Okay. So I'm coming to the end of it. So we can, based on those scenarios, simulation, the time, and the monetary cost, and the operating cost provided by King County Metro, we can now use different columns to show the corresponding numbers for each scenario with the observation, that is the via operating cost plus the time cost associated with riding via at the top. So you can compare. We don't have time for the detail, but the point is that if you look at the total economic cost, next slide, then you will see that the via for that particular day, about 400-person trips, via's cost, total economic cost is about $5,300. Whereas if you use the red color bus with the current frequency even, it's 6,700. So via is actually, from economic cost perspective, less costly because of the saving in time. But I also want to point out that looking at the cost this way, even considering parking cost, the lowest number, unfortunately, is actually drive alone. Okay, so we can discuss what it means when we have time, but for now, I don't. So continue. Okay, so here is summary. And basically, I would say that the conceptual framework jointly with the simulation tool allow us to do some analysis of the comparative cost effectiveness. And the last point here, in the particular case, we examined the on-demand microtransit is cost effective in comparison to other cases, but this is not intended to be a general conclusion because of other contexts, other cases we have not looked at, and we have enough reason to believe the results would be somewhat different, whether it's qualitatively and quantitatively, not sure, but that's where we are. Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks, King. And we're going to have time for Q&A. I have questions already that I want to ask so badly, but we have other presentations coming up. Without further ado, Nick Klein. It's okay, Eric. We're used to this now in the last, doing this for over 2 years now. It's okay. Hey, there we go.
So let me just start off. My talk's going to be a little bit different. I decided to talk more broadly about the topics. I'm an assistant professor at Cornell. I'm in the Department of City and Regional Planning. My own research focuses on the role of transportation in people's lives over many years, particularly the way that low-income households access transportation and how it affects their social and economic mobility. We know from lots of research that people here on this panel and others have done, that access to good transportation is associated with moving up the economic ladder, right? You all know it intuitively, right? If you can get to a job, if you have good transportation, you can get to a job and sort of secure your incomes. In most places of the U.S., that means having a car, right? And so the question is, what do we do in these other contexts, right? What do we do in places where there's low density, right, where the jobs are in the suburbs, where people are in cities? How do we deal with that problem, and what do people do in that context? So a lot of my work looks at sort of how low-income households navigate those challenges, right? And a lot of times that means going out to buy a car, right? We've talked about this on the earlier panels. You asked questions about whether people are accessing cars. And a lot of times that means, Eric, is everything all right? Going out to buy a car, right? We've talked about this on the earlier panels. You asked questions about whether people are accessing cars. Can you give me a thumbs up over there? Eric, is everything all right? To buy a car, right? We've talked about this on the earlier. I'll just keep talking. Okay. So, sorry. Okay. Panels, you ask questions about whether people are accessing cars. Can you give me a thumbs up over there? Eric, is everything all right? To buy a car, right? We talked about this on the earlier. I'll just keep talking. Okay. So, sorry. Okay. Thumbs up over there. Eric, is everything all right? Hey, Eric, can you hear me?
Yes, better.
I can't hear you, so should I just go ahead and keep going?
Go ahead. That should be a lot better. That was on my end. So sorry about that. Please.
Okay. Do I should I restart or should I?
No, I think you can continue where you left off. We could hear you. So thanks.
Okay. So sorry for the confusion, folks. And I hope it wasn't too hard to wait. So I'll just keep going. Right. So a lot of my research looks at the struggles for how lower income households navigate the built environment that we have, right? And what they do, and often that means getting a car. But today I wanted to talk a little bit about sort of the context for the problem we're talking about. A couple months ago, I went to the library here at Cornell, and I went and got like a microfiche of this conference from 1968. It was a conference on transportation and poverty. I know you can't read it very well up there. It's all scratchy. That's what the cover looked like, even in person. Right, and this conference was looking at the same issues that we're talking about today, right? Like the same issues. It's from 1968, sorry. I might have said 78, right? So for over 50 years, we've been struggling with this questions of how do we deal with this problem of getting people to jobs, accessing jobs, especially for people accessing jobs in the suburbs, right? We're talking about suburbanization of jobs. We're talking about struggles to get cars, right? The transit struggles. And so how do we deal with this problem, right? And so at this symposium, there was a bunch of different proposals that came across, right? And so one of the papers that came out of that was this paper by Sandy Rosenblum arguing that we should have deregulation of taxis and jitneys, right, as a solution to the problems of limited jobs in urban areas, right, and of helping people get access to jobs, right? So this is one of the solutions that people came up with. right? And so for this 50 plus years, we've been talking about this is Uber and Lyft that we've been talking about, right? It's jitneys by a different name, right? The deregulation of the taxi industry. Another possible solution is this article by Sumner Myers, Personal Transportation for the Poor, right? And again, talking about the same issues that we've been talking about how people without an automobile lacks access to opportunities, right? And so he proposes here in this article, essentially subsidizing car ownership for low-income households, right? Something that we see and is still talked about 50 years later. I've done research on this. Others have done research on this. It's still a thing that people talk about and one of the potential solutions. And you know, the other solutions in this symposium, in this research was, I don't have a good image for it, so I'm not showing it, was sort of free transit, right? So in 1968, conversations about free transit were the same conversations about what are the trade-offs if we subsidize transit? Does it mean that we can't operate as much frequency, right? How much will people use it? The same kinds of questions we have today about transit, free transit service. And then lastly, you know, we have seen demand responsive, flexible transit solutions, you know, happening since the 1970s, right? So here's an article from Rochester, research done outside of Rochester, right? It was focused on access to the suburban jobs for low-income residents in Rochester, began service in 1973. Another sort of U.S. Federal Department of Transportation funded research study, right? And there were many, many more of these that have been going on since the 1970s. And so I think what's really interesting now is we see an explosion of these kinds of services, right? The services that Professor Shen was talking about in Seattle, right? The ones in LA we've seen, here in Milwaukee, in Ithaca, they're doing it. Everywhere is doing these kinds of flexible on-demand services. I'm sure the VIA representative who's on the panel earlier can name 500 cities in the US that are doing some sort of on-demand service or flexible service, right? And so I think one of the questions I'm really curious about and would love to sort of know, and I don't have the answers to this, and I'm not expecting everyone on the panel or people in the audience can answer this, is sort of how is this time different? What is the difference that's going to be happening now? How will service be improved? And then also, what would success look like with these kinds of services, right? What are the measures of service? Is it cost effectiveness, as was discussed earlier? Is it ridership? Is it a better job? Is it access to healthcare or to daycare service? What are the ways that we're going to measure success of these kinds of services? So in the interest of time and with my technical difficulties, I'll wrap up there, and I look forward to the discussion that we'll have later on. Thanks so much.
All right, thanks, Nick. Up next is Tony. See if we can get this to work now. Oh, there we go.
Ready to go?
Yeah.
That's good. All right. Hi, my name's Tony Filippini, and I appreciate the opportunity to be part of the program today. My regret for not being in Milwaukee, but we've got, I would imagine you have some snow, like Des Moines is now covered in snow here, so winter is here. I'm with the Des Moines Regional Transit Authority. We are a regional, in the name, a regional transit authority with 12 member jurisdictions. We're the main public transit provider for all 12 of them. There are others in the metro that are not part of the DART, but is a opt-in type of a service. So our major mode that we provide is in regional bus service. The RTA has been around for about 15 years in its current form, and our governance has really put a greater emphasis on all of our communities beyond just the center city. with that being said, when the RTA was created, we had a very legacy service network that was really reminiscent of the streetcar system that existed 100 years ago. The communities that were outside of Des Moines were very much described as bedroom communities, but in the last 10 years, our region has grown significantly, and those suburban communities are now major employment and retail centers for the metropolitan area. So since our business has been buses, the context of our area has changed dramatically, and technology, as we're all aware of, is evolving so much that there's a lot of new opportunities and new tools in our toolbox about how to provide service that's most appropriate for these areas. And so our commission and staff, starting in 2019, went through a evaluation of sort of the state of transportation, what we can provide, and how do we bring that into our system, in our portfolio of services that we provide. So, the goals were quite simple: is to optimize the service that we provide, identify what are those new ways that we can provide service that would be more effective for the areas that we serve, and then to develop what does that long-term vision look like. With that, there are some new ways that we provide service. And so we started these out over the last couple of years as pilots. The first pilot is what would be known as the TNC partnership, in which we have a specific zone, very much designed to bring people in a specific neighborhood to key locations. These are express locations and also locations that have all day, 7-day-a-week transit service. And it's something that we actually pay third parties. Uber is our major partner, but it's also set up with our local taxi company. And then DART will also do wave needed trips that our other two providers aren't able to, don't have the vehicles to provide. And so those customers are able just to use the Uber app, which we provide a voucher. This is a free service, in which it's because this first mile, last mile, we envision that they'll be paying when they board the bus, when they get to that transfer location. This is something that we started in 2019, just in October, November. So we had 6 months to really get a sense of how it would work. And we've been sort of watching the last 2 years of what the post-COVID and just all the interruptions that happened with that. And we feel like we've learned an awful lot of the limitations, but the opportunities that this sort of service can provide to the overall region. The other service that we started is much like what we're talking about now. It's our microtransit service. So we started a pilot in November of last year. We just had our 52nd weeks, or we have had 1 full year now of service, in which one of our suburban communities has a full, almost the entire community is in this single zone. The service is provided door to door, 5 days a week for about 12 hours each day. The fare is equivalent with what a fixed route fare would be. This program is also powered by VIA, but it's operated by DART. And so we're using our own operators and our own vehicles to provide the service. But we're using the VIA application and technology for that support. We also allow people to call in to do booking, as well as using an online web browser tool to do the same thing if they don't have a phone. With that being said, we're sort of taking a new look at how we determine what the most appropriate type of services that we provide. As I had mentioned, the context of our region is becoming very diverse, is becoming much larger, and is continuously growing. There might be contexts in which these microtransits or TNC partnerships make a lot of sense today, but we also understand that the region is continuing to develop, and those areas will develop in such a way that maybe down the road, other ways will be more appropriate. And so the way that our design philosophy is coming about is a very layered approach in which coming through and looking at what are the strengths of each part of our transportation system that we deliver, and really sort of building on core network that provide the most amount of trips for the most amount of people at sort of key locations, and then layering on ways that the microtransit and those other mobility options can really create some new coverage and expand our reach in places that fixed route just doesn't make as much, isn't as able to do those trips. So sort of just to tie it all together is what does our evolution of a network look like if we start reconsidering some of our current system, and what are some of those zones in which we'll have either some TNZ partnerships or microtransits. And really the key is recognizing that we probably already have 3 apps and there could be additional apps. How do we create a seamless experience as people, and we're asking people to start using multiple ways to get from where they're going from one part of the region to another. And so a big key of that will be exploring technology integrations and ways to make it as seamless as possible. So that is sort of the broad overview of sort of our philosophy and the new services that we are sort of pioneering and jumping into, and hoping to replicate that over the coming years and develop a more robust system that serves more people in more places. So thank you.
Thanks, Tony. Great, I believe we have Patricia.
That is the YouTube video, though, not the.
Where did your thing go? Where's home?
Mm-hmm. Why is it so little? I don't know why. Good afternoon. Can everybody hear me?
I can.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I just wanted to get situated here. So first off, thank you very much for inviting me to talk about the service that we have going on in Green Bay. So I'm super excited to share. Can you see my screen okay at this point?
No, it's actually a really good shot of your family. You move your presentation over just a little bit and make it full screen. Yeah. There we go. Perfect.
Are you able to see the screen?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. All right. Thank you. So I am Patty Kiwas. I am the transit director in the city of Green Bay. So just wanted to share the services that we have going on. It's very interesting to hear this afternoon everybody's thoughts and what's going on. So sounds all very familiar to some of the service that we have here. So just to kind of get going, we actually started down this avenue of microtransit services in the fall of 2019. As we all know, we had lots of changes in the spring of 2020, which at that point, that was at the same time that Via Transportation received our contract for paratransit services. So we had worked pretty closely with them to implementing some microtransit service that we had some thoughts on doing here in the city of Green Bay. So what we ended up doing with Metro staff, along with our MPO Brown County Planning, we had really worked closely together reviewing kind of current services and where we felt we saw the need for microtransit versus some fixed route service. So to be honest, we clearly started with a blank map and said, what do we see we need to do here? And where do we see people utilizing the services? And so we really spent a lot of time on that with a team that we created to review all of those services. And, you know, with COVID, it definitely created some challenges for all of us, but it also was a silver lining for us here in the city of Green Bay, for giving us the opportunity to try some things a little bit differently, and maybe not as affecting the complete, you know, the whole ridership that we may have other times. So it really gave us the opportunity to look at things and implement pretty quickly. We actually launched a pilot of our microtransit service area in August of 2020, and then, you know, we had public hearings and a lot of customer feedback and various things, tweaking different things that we saw maybe were working, not working. One of our biggest goals was to maintain the level of service that we had in the areas as a whole, but we really wanted it to be seamless. We wanted people to be able to shorten their lengths of trip, just because over time, as we saw funding challenges over the past 10, 12 years, you know, one of the first things that all affect us is reduction in services. And so, you know, we experienced in our community areas of 30-minute service going to 60-minute service. And so that's really challenging for riders, and especially with us, you know, hearing from employers needing more assistance with getting employees to work for third shift. It was difficult with some of the funding levels for us to be able to expand in some of those areas. So as we, you know, looked at various things and wanted to be able to reach those other areas, maybe, you know, where a traditional fixed route service may not have been ideal in our community, we were really able to go and look at this service. We created a lot of different changes in there, but like I said, one of our biggest things that we really wanted to focus on was it being seamless from our fixed route service to our microtransit service, which in Green Bay here we call GBM On Demand. And so our fares are integrated between both services. If you buy a 30-day fare, a 30-day bus pass on a fixed route for fixed route services, that same bus pass you get to utilize on microtransit. So the fares are exactly the same. And so that was something that was really ideal for us. You know, it's all app-based. You can book your ride via an app, of course, or you can call a phone number to do it if you do not have a smartphone option. And that was something that was really important to us, making sure that all of our riders would have access, even if they did not have a smartphone. So all of our fixed route buses are equipped with a flip phone that would allow that trip if they need to. All of our fixed routes were redesigned to hit our 5 transfer points within 30 minutes. Every 30 minutes they're there, so if they're meeting up with microtransit, it really creates that seamless ride. But as we did this pilot in 2020, we ran this pilot for about a year. We received a lot of positive feedback, and it was a big change for our community. This was something very unique and very different that our community had not experienced. And so with the success of that pilot, in August of 21, we expanded and launched that service tremendously. As I said, we created a service development team that worked together along with our MPO, and we redesigned the entire system. All fixed routes but 2 were changed. And so this gives you a little bit of an idea of our expansion that we did. We actually created 4 different zones, and we have 4 different transfer points. Fixed route buses service those transfer points every 30 minutes. So if you're utilizing microtransit in any of our outlining areas, you are able to take microtransit from zone to zone or to your corresponding zone. And then if you need to come downtown or into one of the more heavily areas downtown, you would then transfer at a transfer point to utilize fixed route. So our goal was really to be able to stretch and expand and provide you know, a better rider experience in some of our outlining areas. And sometimes that tends to be where we may have employers that individuals need to get to. Sometimes there's schooling. We have we have colleges kind of on both ends. So there's, you know, several different reasons why we decided to look at that. So as we went through and did this, I mean, the feedback and the community response has been very successful. We have made a couple minor adjustments through this already in 2022, and those adjustments are just really expanding the zones. We actually provide transportation to the city of Green Bay, the city of Deep Pier, along with the villages of Ashwaubenon, Alloway, and Bellevue. So all 5 community partners really truly needed to buy in to the design of the new system. And so that has gone over very, very well, very supportive. And I think it really gives those communities the opportunity to reach areas that we may not have been. I think we all know when there's requests to, you know, when they call and they say, can we provide, you know, transportation to this employer that's on the outskirts, that's challenging for all of us with a fixed route, because you're having to redesign, you know, your routes and all your connections and those types of things. So it's not as easy for us to do that. With expanding microtransit zones, it really gives us the ability to make those changes. And one of the important things is we have a lot of other surrounding communities to the city of Green Bay that previously could not maybe financially afford public transportation option, where this really is an option that I think is more viable and more cost effective for them to possibly consider moving forward. And so I just want to show, this is the overall system map after we fully integrated our fixed route and our microtransit. As I said, it was very important to our service, to our Transit Commission, and to the City of Green Bay to ensure that this is seamless. So we tried to do that with the fares, with people booking their rides, whether you want to use app or phone. I will tell you that our response time in this area, within microtransit, we're averaging about 14 minutes or so for a response time, which has been great. One of the things I wanted to mention is what we've been able to do is at night, where service may not have been real busy for us, we actually include all of these zones. The entire service area is microtransit for the last 2 hours of our fixed route service, or of our service. In addition to, we are going through public comment period at this point to expand that to 4 hours in the evening. Saturday, we currently provide 4 hours Saturday afternoon of complete service for microtransit as well. So that gives riders the ability to maneuver the entire system. There is no fixed route system provided after 3:45 on Saturdays. It's all done by microtransit. And so, and even on those days, we've seen a little bit larger response times on Saturdays, of course, when we go to that full system wide. But however, we are, you know, about 78% of our rides or so are still averaging well below that 20 minutes, which is our goal to do. So, you know, I know some of the other examples in regarding the service, some things that are a little bit different here in the city of Green Bay is we operate it like a turnkey solution. So VIA is our current provider. They have actually built this microtransit system with us, and they have been really great partners to work with, and they actually provide the booking of the trips, obviously, the software solutions, as well as the operator and the vehicle. So it truly is a turnkey solution, just as our paratransit services in the city of Green Bay. So with that, I think thank you very much, and I'll definitely look forward to any questions as well. It's a lot of information to cover in a short time, so thank you.
Great, thanks, Patricia. So, Eric, are we allowed to open it up to all the presenters now? Oh, here they come. Unmute, please put video on. Sounds great. I don't know, should we just leave this in the backdrop? Oh, there we go. Excellent. Well, thank you all. I had just, you know, I have got a few questions, but I clearly want to open up the floor to questions here too from the audience. I kind of work my way backwards. Patricia, a lot of great information in a short amount of time, but a lot to chew on. A couple of things. You mentioned a lot of buy-in from the communities. It's not just Green Bay. It's your neighbors. Is there like an established organization or association that allows you all to get together and really stand up these plans and programs and actions? Is it really powered by committee? I think this would just really resonate with the Milwaukee region and their kind of their own unique dynamic. But it would be nice to hear from the neighbors to the further north. What kind of dynamic is that like when you're trying to talk about transit changes and introducing microtransit, not to just to Green Bay, but to all of these community members? Can you walk us through that a little bit? She froze. Okay, I think she's frozen. Are they all frozen? Everyone's frozen. No questions for anybody. Easiest panel they've ever been on. Well, let's give everyone here time to generate some questions, maybe have a last meatball. Some veggies over there. Get your greens, everybody. Well, I'm going to take advantage that you're here, King. Is that okay? Is that okay? I'm going to ask King a question. So, excellent presentation. It was the research seemed, it was very financial focused. You're looking at the economics behind this planning process too, and using that as a key metric. Did the scenarios look at ridership or other attributes other than just straight costs?
Important question. The answer is we simplified our analysis by focusing on the comparative cost. And we assume the 390 some riders will use the alternatives. So we assume the same group of people. We even assume that if they were all driving along, they all have a car. So it is quite a simplified analysis.
Okay, yeah. So there was no ridership projections or
no,
anything?
That would involve a much larger research grant.
Got it.
So yes, if anybody is interested, sure.
Another question I have, were there any service changes implemented based on your research findings?
No, not yet, but the good news is, first of all, King County Metro, so Casey, actually presented our result to their leadership, and I think it generated, interest and discussion what those means. And also that I actually worked with somebody in WashDOT, that's Washington State Department of Transportation. They already approved my second stage of study using this general approach, but taking a couple of different cases. So one would be looking at a far suburban, urban peripheral area. Another one is some kind of rural community. So we look at, in a somewhat broader sense, different types of on-demand services, or what we call TMOD, because we believe that the transit agency should be taking the leadership role in initiating this kind of partnership. That's why I use T as so those are, I guess, some indications of positive initial impact.
Got it. Yeah. And everyone's back here? I think so. If they can hear us. We'll find out. Real quick too, it was the research is very, creating those connections to light rail, established light rail stations. Yeah. Do you think, has this already been discussed, or is there any other thoughts about different service types beyond just to the stations? Are we thinking maybe zonal? Are we thinking point to
Ex-
point,
yeah.
door to door?
Again, excellent question, Peter. So the WashDOT projects that I mentioned, they are no longer about first mile, last mile. They are about suburban, for suburban community and even rural area. So it's different type. And by the way, the current VR2 transit service there is no longer just first mile and last mile. Ria here could give you a lot of detail. Actually, one of the cases.
Well, we'll bring a ride on up here. It's fine.
Yes,
It's okay.
is now serving a Randon, that is a sub-center in the area.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for that. And is everyone able to hear us? Is everyone back online?
I think the problem is internet.
Oh, okay.
And I'm hardwired, but it's not showing up as hardwired.
Okay. So they can't hear us or anything?
So it's going to be frozen. It won't work. So,
No such luck.
yeah, it's going to be very choppy, which is why we
Oh,
hardwired
okay.
this. But, so hold tight for 1 second. I want to see what to do here. We may just have to end this part of it.
Oh, okay. Well, any questions for King while he's up here? We have a question over here from Bob. Thanks, Bob. Oh, can we get a mic?
Theoretical structure that you showed initially, and it had the sort of the environmental costs as a part of it too. How much did you integrate that into your analysis here?
That's why we have some critical academics in audience, right?
Intellectual sparring. It's always my favorite part of this.
So what we did in this particular study, because again, it's a quite limited resource, we conceptualize it and we look at available literature. It's not very current, just to let you know, actually. More than 10 years old literature, which indicated, I know, Peter, you're laughing, but that's what we got in terms of the more rigorous reviewed literature. If we took their estimated costs incorporate them into, the dollar amount difference is about $250. So wouldn't change much in our current result. Now that said, it's more than 10 years old, and also depending on in the future how desperate, right, the economy will be under the impact of, say, climate change. So those figures would change, and if for the next phase with WashDOT, definitely we will need to be much more rigorous and hopefully more current. But somebody else hopefully is doing this kind of more updated estimate, because it by itself is a major project, as you can imagine.
So maybe driving to the parking ride lots may not end up being the lowest.
That's right. That's right. And the important point related to that is the fact is, out of the 400 or so riders, some of them are not going to be ever able to drive for various reasons. So no matter how lower that estimated cost, that does not apply to everybody in terms of user. So that's important for me to address. Okay.
Excellent.
I hope made it clear for other people what I'm answering. Yeah. Great.
Any other questions? Oh, up front here.
Hello.
Oh, hello. How are you?
Thank you. Kind of like a follow-up from that question from Professor Snyder. Yesterday, I was at a conference, Urban Spaceship, first time attending, a lot of great people. And when looking at where we are positioned in the country, Milwaukee is a very desirable, Wisconsin, Midwest is a very desirable place to be in the next 20 years because of climate change and just because of all of the things that this beautiful state has to offer. But my question is, would any of those costs over like the next 10 years, like how much will that demand increase? If those costs have been projected, perhaps because the mayor of the city in Wisconsin has this projection of having 1 million Milwaukeeans in his, in the period of him being a mayor. And I think about, this kind of conversations we're having right now, and what kind of infrastructure, but also what kind of funding we need to really have, the capacity to service all of those people. So maybe it's a very broad question, but just kind of going from that.
Yeah, I think it's a really important question about time, and I think people's answers could be really different, okay? Depends on assumptions and perspective. Here's what I would try to address your question. I think if climate change accelerates, then there will be greater pressure and stronger justification for policy, makers like mayors you mentioned, to try to internalize the negative externality through this kind of programs, projects. For example, just stretch the discussion a little bit. The discussion, for example, on building high-speed rail in the U.S. Well, if you look at narrowly, the ridership now, I don't think that goes very far, the argument. But once the argument about, okay, under future scenario and under greater pressure, and you need to have more people sharing, transportation tools like high-speed rail, all of a sudden that justification becomes different. So that's the same, I think, for any shared mode of transportation in comparison to driver alone. That's how I see it.
Great. I would just add that they're projecting that by 2050, the global communities, over 70% are going to be living in urbanized areas, and that's something to really consider for my daughter's generation and our future generations. The fact is that transit and other high-capacity services are the most efficient use of our public assets in our streets. It's about moving more people more efficiently. And again, as I mentioned at the very beginning of this, we need to be very, very progressive in our land use and transportation decisions. They go hand in hand. We need to be smarter about housing, putting people closer to jobs and essential services and their loved ones. I mean, if we continue to keep sprawling and keep creating pockets out in the hinterlands and creating this stress on our public resources, that is not going to be an effective way for our future generations. So I'll just end with that. So thank you all very much. We got another panel coming up. Appreciate it.
Yes. Thanks so much, Pete. Thanks, King. Thanks to all of our panelists. We're going to take a 5-minute break, and then we will have our final panel of the afternoon, and we'll really talk about the future of FlexRide Milwaukee. So 5 minutes.
fence, I mean, the lane's
Oh,
already
there we go.
You know it
I think that one may go up.
so well.
Okay, we're going to get started with our final panel. This is on the future of FlexRide, and the first few minutes of this panel, we are going to bring up Dave Steele to give a short presentation about FlexRide 2.0, and then we will bring up Eric Brooks to be the moderator of the panel discussion, and he'll have a chance to introduce the panelists at that point. But I want to welcome Dave Steele from Mobilize to present now.
All right, how's everybody doing? 4 o'clock? Okay. So I really appreciate everybody being here today to talk about FlexRide Milwaukee and what we've learned, and really also extremely excited to talk about the next generation of FlexRide. What I think Eric Lind here, if Eric's still here, coined FlexRide 2.0. And that name really kind of stuck here. Now that's our internal name. It's not going to be the official name as we roll it out. It still will be, of course, FlexRide Milwaukee. But I wanted to lead with this slide here, which was a big day in the history of Mobilize, and that's when we received word of our $4.2 million grant from the state of Wisconsin, Workforce Innovation Grant Program, and that's our announcement there with Governor Evers. And you'll see Kathy Eli, that's our board chair. Kathy, former mayor of Wauwatosa and current chair of our board. So thank you for being here, Kathy. Kevin Muse, Eric Lind, Celia Rueda from Sewer Pack, and myself. So, this really is the team effort, this and other people that are not pictured here that really helped make this happen. The Workforce Innovation Grant was highly competitive. I think it was about 200 solid applications that they'd gotten throughout the entire state, and we were one of only a handful selected, and even a smaller number selected from the Milwaukee area. So why did they choose us? Well, they chose us because transportation is a huge issue, as we've heard repeatedly throughout today. One of the largest barriers to employment in our region. And also, this was a regional effort really based on partnerships. Happy to see here in the room today a lot of the partners that have played a hand in this. Milwaukee County Transit System, Milwaukee County. I'll be honest, as a lifelong bus rider, one of my concerns was that it would be competition for the bus. But we're happy to see that it's not. MCTS has really embraced FlexRide as a partner, and that makes me feel good as a lifelong bus rider and advocate. You'll hear the ads on the buses. There's advertising FlexRide to riders, the voice ads. Employ Milwaukee, of course. UWM, and of course Sewer Pack. For so much of the heavy lifting and not just creating a transportation program in 3 months like they did with the pilot, but really helping us lay a solid foundation for FlexRide 2.0. So our organization, Mobilize, is a nonprofit. We're a transit advocacy group that actually goes back to 1991 when we were founded. And really up until now, it's been a very small organization, but we're growing up very quickly here under the leadership of our board of directors, and Kathy is our chair. So, it's really not just Dave Steele or, one person. It really is a team effort, not just our partners, but our outstanding board of directors that's really giving us the foundation for taking this on. We're also going to have an advisory board made up of businesses and community members from our rider communities to really provide that direct oversight for FlexRide 2.0. I think somebody said earlier on one of the panel, how do we measure success? Well, for us is the best quality service for our Flex riders that we can pull off, but also, of course, cost effectiveness, because it wouldn't suit anybody any good to have a program that goes away at the end of 2024 because we have trouble sustaining it. So the next slide we can just go into a little bit. So our goals here, really briefly, we will expand the Menominee Falls footprint to more northwest side and kind of west side suburbs, and launch an entirely new zone down in the south suburbs of Oak Creek and Franklin. Really to have happy to have John Regatz here from the city of Franklin. They've been a key partner in that effort. So yeah, it's expanding the model to new employment zones. We're also going to expand where our flex riders are coming from. So as we see right now, our flex riders are coming from the 2 zones that we talked about earlier on the north side of the city, where we are right now. And we're going to expand that. We're not quite sure if it'll be the entire city of Milwaukee or maybe the entirety of Milwaukee County. But we will expand to serve more folks within the city. We're also very serious about local transportation companies having a key part in this service, including especially transportation companies from underrepresented communities. If you look around the city, there's no shortage of transportation entrepreneurs in the city. Take a look around, here in this neighborhood, and you'll see a lot of vehicles rolling by with, magnets on the side of transportation services that are provided to our community members. So there's a robust, history of that in our city, of local, small companies in African American and Latino communities in our city. And we want to make sure that that's a key part of the service moving forward for a host of reasons. And one of those reasons is it provides that local knowledge of our riders and our drivers, the communities that really we're serving. And I talked about this earlier, and another key reason that we were recipients of this grant, highly competitive grant, is that we did expand it to include workforce mobility hubs, the early childhood centers. Really looking at what we can provide working parents, and even looking at through our RFP process of even providing a 1-seat ride, which would be ideal, right? A 1-seat ride to you and your kid to daycare and then you on to work. So we'll work out a lot of logistics and the cost challenges around that, but that is our goal. The next slide. So I'm not going to read all of the details here. I'm sure you'll receive the slides afterwards, but it's not just the core service of FlexRide. There's a bunch of other components in there. Our partner, Milwaukee Career Collaborative, which runs vans right out of 35th in Wisconsin to long-distance sites, will be part of this effort. And that's for those places that are really far out of the scope where FlexRide might not be the most efficient alternative. Places like Oconomowoc or even up in West Bend and places a little bit further out, drivable from the city, but hard to serve with more of a FlexRide model. Looking at TNC vouchers, so TNC is just transportation speak for Uber and Lyft, so vouchers to help with those kind of emergency rides, especially for working parents. And then some dollars to help our local MBE and DBE companies access the opportunity here, and some outreach activities as well. We can go on to the next one. Okay, so I always like to think of it as in planning a new service, we have what we know the service is going to look like, and then what we don't know the service is going to look like. So we've issued an RFP in partnership with Sewer PAC. It's out on the street. Right now as we speak, it closes November 30th, end of the month. We have an independent team of folks evaluating the responses that we get. The responses that we've had from national companies has been really outstanding. But we know that it will primarily remain a workforce service, Milwaukee to suburbs. We know about the employment zones that I talked about. We know that we'll engage at least 10% of the fleet management, what we call, basically the drivers and the maintenance and the vehicles to our local companies, hopefully more than 10%, but our minimum is 10%. And we'll position our workforce mobility hubs, our child care centers as workforce mobility hubs. Now what that means is essentially cost assistance to flex riders for child care. Hopefully a 1-seat ride. I don't want to make any promises there, but hopefully a 1-seat ride. And then other types of perks, and benefits that a working parent would be able to get by participating in the FlexRide program. And the next one, so this is my last slide, and this is what we don't know yet, right? We have our known knowns and we have our known unknowns. So here's the known unknowns that we're really working with our, that we wrote into the RFP and we're gonna be working with our vendor to help figure out. We may look at adjusting that model from a pickup zone to more of a pickup spot. And this is where the partnership with MCTS is especially critical. We might even could have, like you have with an Uber, right, where you have the choice of different types of service models. Maybe on a Tuesday, I'll take a bus to a park and ride for a bit of a cheaper ride. But on a Wednesday, I'll pay a little bit more as the rider to have it come pick me up closer to my home or right at my home. But we're gonna look at what that, you know, the cost effectiveness of that. As you can imagine, you know, I took an Uber just last week from the airport. It was $30 one way from the airport to my house over by the stadium, about 5-6 miles. So you do the math. It's a you know very expensive proposition down the road. We're you know working with you know whichever company we end up selecting as our vendor. Really looking at setting up a business membership type of model, similar to an Uber for Business, to really facilitate those types of transactions that would help employers use this as like an employee benefit, right? Will you know help cover some of the fares for FlexRiders that use the service. Now you know right now the drivers are all independent contractors. We're looking at that model. Is that the best one moving forward for us? And we'll take a close look at that. And you know I want to stress that you know we have the dollar amount that we know we can spend on the program. We are looking to expand upon that from other sources. I don't want to give short shrift to our local philanthropy partners, United Way and Bader Philanthropies. You start talking about $4 million and you lose sight of the fact that 3 years ago it was the $50,000 from Bader that really helped get us to where we are today in United Way, taking those first couple of steps on this road. So that's huge. But we don't know exactly how many people we'll be able to serve and exactly which market models. That will all come through the program design process after we select our vendor. So that's a little bit about FlexRide 2.0. I'm happy to answer any questions after our panel, but first I'm gonna toss it to my friend Eric Brooks to moderate our final panel. Thank you.
Oh, yeah. You're not done yet. Okay. Good evening, everybody. First, my sincere apologies for that last panel. I own that, we own that, and I was looking forward so much to hearing that give and take, but I'm glad their presentations came through. But I appreciate your understanding and patience with us as well, and knowing that we can learn a lot from what others have done here. As you can see, and there's plenty of other great examples of how this has worked, maybe how it hasn't too, which I know that the folks behind this have looked at, will continue to look at, and importantly, others will learn from us. Bob mentioned, I mean, the number of people from across the country that are tuning in as well. I know there are others with eyes on us here in Milwaukee, in the Milwaukee area. So, but we want to spend some time talking about FlexRide 2.0. I'm not going to do deep bios on everyone. You can see their names and titles. I want to thank everyone for being here, and I think everyone has a different perspective here. And I'd welcome to hear that. I think we've got some time now to dive into this. We'll take potentially some questions too. If you have any, raise your hand. I have some to start. But I thank you all for being here on the panel. So let's get into it, if you don't mind. I want to start quickly with Dave. Going back to the expansion plan, how will decisions be made? I mean, Oak Creek and Franklin's been talked about a lot. It was mentioned up there, but as you look to where and when, but generally how are you approaching decisions and as far as the expansion piece?
Yep. You know, really looking at the data first about where our riders, you know, want to go, where the jobs are. I mean, you know, that's what led to the pilot being launched in Menominee Falls. But in terms of, you know, really the big strategic decisions, you know, we're governed by an independent board of directors that, you know, ultimately, you know, is responsible for, as I say, crushing this grant and, you know, being the best stewards of these dollars that we've been granted as possible, but also creating a program that'll be sustainable. In terms of the granular level of that service delivery model, that advisory board that I spoke of will be huge, and that's where we really, want business leaders and community representatives to make sure that we're being highly responsive to the needs of our flex riders and our participating employers as we can possibly be.
Turn to your left and ask John from Franklin, how do you hope expansion decisions are made? Allison, you're next with this question too.
Well, if we're looking for the opportunities to have jobs, I think that's fine. I mean, as we look at Franklin, we have one new business park coming online that's going to create at least 1,000 jobs in the near future. And so that's going to be an opportunity for people that want to work there. And I would think they would be jobs that they would pick, and so it would come out in the numbers. Another thing that, in regards to that steering committee, we also have very involved existing industries in the neighboring Franklin Business Park. And so without that commitment, without that involvement, I doubt we would be as close as we are. It may not be mentioned in the discussion, but those companies are all committed. I mean,
They want it, right?
Very committed.
They very much want it.
Yeah, and so they want to have that access to that service. And so, like say, in the neighboring corporate park that's getting started, we have prospects coming in that are saying we need this service. We have to have this service because the workforce is foremost on their minds. And so we've got we'll have the numbers, and then we'll have the participation on the steering committee. But I think it's going to be it's going to be kind of symbolic of the evolution of this whole process. We need this particular program now, and this will continue to be part of a multimodal program for Franklin. As BRT gets established and comes and serves these business parks and other communities in the Oakwood and Franklin, business area, they're going to need to have other connections. So this will continue to be the last mile as we go into the future.
Is that a similar story in Waukesha County as well? And are you hearing interest for Waukesha County employers and how do you hope the decisions are made to get this expanded out there as well?
Well, based on some past experience with other programs like Vanpool and different things, what we've learned is that to convince our county board to be a partner, financial partner, you really need to demonstrate partnerships and willingness to financially contribute, and that's across the board. So our county board is looking at Milwaukee County. Are they gonna, if the rides cross, are we both contributing? We're going to look at our communities. If you want that, if Brookfield wants the ride, is Brookfield gonna financially participate? We're gonna look at the employers. We've had that past experience with Vanpool where employers say, yes, we want it, but when you actually say, will you contribute $1 to the ride, then not so much. So that, I think, is one of the ways you can help determine where it's expanded. It is who's most willing to be a partner. That's what we would look at.
Jeff, I'll ask you that. I mean, you with MCTS's experience, I think there's been issues with that, right? Trying to find employers willing to step up and help pay for this, correct?
Absolutely. As a planner, we would get phone calls, emails on a monthly basis. Hey, extend a bus route out here, or, hey, I'm, relocating my company, on the outskirts of your county, or even, into Waukesha County. Just bring a bus route out here. Well, obviously it's not that easy, or cost effective, right? So, from a governmental perspective, we need partners in all of your areas, of expertise. The employers, we need you to advocate for transit, for FlexRide, all kinds of funding that even our elected officials at times can only do so much because
she's in the room. I will call out Representative Andraka. Thank you. We rode the bus, and she, at the state legislature, she would even say, I can only do so much to convince the majority of, the need for this extra funding for these kinds of solutions. And so our business community, it is essential for you to explain, to promote, and educate how much, of a critical solution this is for your needs. As we heard earlier, that'll spread. People will hear it, and even, our representatives, in Waukesha County and elsewhere, throughout Madison, this message, it has to be heard.
Thank you. John, are Franklin employers willing to maybe at least consider chipping in here?
Employers, yes.
Yes.
I'm sure they are. Yeah.
And I'll ask Eric that question too. And Dave too. You've dealt with a lot of employers just in rolling out the pilot service. Do you think there's an appetite to at least consider that? If not, outright put money down, say, yeah, this is important to us, we're going to do this? Eric, first, how about you?
Yeah, I wouldn't put words in any employers' mouths, but we've definitely talked to more employers that have been open to the possibility, and I think Craig even said they're subsidizing the fares for their employees because they see the benefit that it can bring now and in the future. And we've had a lot of conversations. We worked with Dave and mobilized to form a workforce mobility team a few years ago, and had many conversations with employers who are in at different ends of the spectrum in considering transportation for their employees. Some of them have never thought about it, and they're just like, okay, this is way overwhelming. Transportation is too complicated. How do we figure this out? And others are actually paying for van pools or things like that on their own. But there are different resources for different employers too. Some of the larger companies, it's maybe a little bit easier for them to find it in their budgets, but it's also maybe a little more difficult to get to the corporate level and make sure that there's an understanding as far as the benefits and why that investment should be made. So
some of that's telling that story, they're making sure they understand what this is,
yep.
How it's benefiting their employees literally at the one-by-one level, but that's important. Dave?
Yeah, I mean, the size of the company and the institution makes a huge, huge difference. And, Pete Costa can tell you that when you look at these large institutions like Google or, big hospitals, where there's thousands and thousands of employees going to one place at any given time, it's a much easier proposition to say, okay, well, we're going to buy a fleet of vans and hire some drivers, right? Now, to my knowledge, the only company in our region that really does that is Quad Graphics out in Sussex. And again, it's all numbers, right? So if you have, 4,000 or 5,000 people all going to one place generally at the same time, it's a lot easier proposition to say, yeah, we should get into the transportation business. But our region is really built on small companies. It's Scanpacks of the world. It's 1 to 200 employees. It's a very difficult proposition to say that a small company like that is going to go ahead and buy a van and hire drivers. They don't do transportation. They manufacture things, right? So the fact that we have a program that is up and running, and thanks to the National Science Foundation, we were able to launch a pilot with it. Is a lot different value proposition for an employer to say, okay, well, we'll buy into this thing that already exists versus having to go it alone. And there's a long history of organizations like the Joseph Project is one that's had a lot of success over the years, where employers will buy in and contribute, as long as it doesn't mean that they have to get into the transportation business themselves.
Neil, does the state want to see that kind of partnership? I assume they do. The state has just put in over $4 million into this. I assume they want to see other governments consider partnering at the county, local level, but also businesses too, right? Is that fair to say?
Yeah, especially at the regional level. We want to see
the power behind MMAC as a regional partner and the heads that they can turn with policymakers will in turn allow the state to make some changes on how we operate things. Yeah, I apologize, I was not here for the whole session today because we had an entire team meeting in Madison. And Secretary Hughes had mentioned, apart from being really excited Wednesday morning for having a job still, that her she's most excited about the $130 million from ARPA funds that was dedicated to the 17 successful applicants out of the 200 that came in on this. So why I mention that is we're looking for best practices that come out of all 17 that we can incorporate into other programs, and maybe there's other solutions that we can start tracking data on that can be used to change policy in that regard. So we see it as a huge blessing that there's $130 million that's getting invested in a workforce through creative solutions. If we can track that and take that data and grow some of these systems, we're excited to be part of that.
Dave, question for you. What role will or should equity play in these decisions too as you look to what's next? We talked some about equity today, but that was a key part of the NSF grant for sure.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think if you're in the business of change, you have to be in the business of equity. I mean, to say that it's something that you think about over here on the side is, it's like one line item, on your list. It has to be absolutely central to what you're thinking of doing. And, as we expand this throughout the entire city, our FlexRide customer base will change. We'll be serving more diverse clientele, including folks with very different experiences with microtransit and Ubers and Lyfts from a language standpoint, from an accessibility standpoint. So, when you look at things through an equity lens, I mean, it says, okay, we're looking to serve our Flex Riders to the best possible degree, so how do we make sure that we do that by meeting our Flex Riders where they're at and really understanding what's, going to best serve them? And then that yields a better result because it's a service that people will want to use. It's good for the employers because they have access to, riders that are using the service. It's better for the riders because they now have a new option. I think that this program here and the success of our pilot and the ridership that we're seeing increasing, to me is, really just a great message to our region that economic development, workforce development, and equity, racial equity in our region are not in conflict with each other. They're two sides of the same coin. One leads to another and the other leads to another. It's a positive symbiotic relationship.
Jeff, you wanted to ask something?
Yeah, definitely. From the county's perspective, obviously racial equity is of utmost importance, right? And so that underlies transportation equity. And as an employer, let's think, are we giving those same opportunities to all our workers regardless of how they get there to their jobs? Are we giving just a little grace for someone who is, had to ride 2 different bus routes or, take FlexRide for the first time? I mean, how are we thinking about where we invest any dollars in our budget for transportation, as far as, as was mentioned earlier, parking versus other modes, all right? Like we need to really think more broadly, outside of our own transportation, habits. And so, from the county's perspective, we would encourage all of you, to try out these other modes just so you can have that firsthand experience and understand, what our fellow brothers and sisters, are going through on a daily basis.
And to that, I'd encourage you, put a plug in for Carl Collective, but our team put together some vignettes of riders on the FlexRide website. And there's some really interesting stories in there about kind of how FlexRide really helped them. And even Craig, I remember we were at an event with a few weeks ago with secretaries from the state talking about this, hearing a couple of your employees talk about what FlexRide meant to them, and yeah, I mean, it was pretty eye-opening as far as how life-changing it was. And it opened my eyes. Yeah, I don't see that every day, and I didn't have to deal with that because I drove to that meeting. I drove to this meeting, but it was really interesting to see that. Those stories are told a little bit on the website. There's a lot more now. You're at hundreds and hundreds of riders. I think there's probably hundreds and hundreds of different stories. I mean, that you would hear along those lines from the rider perspective. Eric, I want to come to you on this one. So, I mean, you've been living FlexRide literally, as mentioned earlier, like at all hours of the day. I don't know if that was part of is that your other duties as assigned job description? I'll look at you, Kevin. But you know these riders almost as potentially as well as anybody because you've had to deal with. I mean, I just wonder what did you learn from them as far as and what surprised you in working with riders, and especially the riders piece, and seeing both the aggregate data of who they are and where they come from, but also the individual stories you've heard and been told. I just wonder what strikes you and what lessons from that can be taken to what's next.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think as you mentioned, the vignettes we're telling, I think just talking to individual riders so that they're not just a rider ID number in a database. We are dealing with human beings who have lives that, they're just trying to get to their job. It was some very interesting anecdotal stories. Some people that were walking not just a last mile, but I think even double-digit miles to get to a job that just wasn't accessible by bus. Some of the stories where people said this is a blessing, or just some of those stories really kept us going during the pilot. And following the data as well, trying to make sure that I would say things that kept me up at night were riders potentially being stranded at their employer, at their job, not being able to get home, or vice versa, being at home and not being able to get to work because they knew if they were late for work or missed their shift, they could potentially lose their job. So we kept a very close eye on that, and when there were riders that we thought were being stranded, we don't have automated vehicles running out there. The drivers are human beings too. Their cars break down. They have their own issues. We dealt with I think the most surprising thing would say, I think we dealt with that sort of individual cases, surprising things that came up that we weren't anticipating with the drivers and just having the supply on the road. I think those were the most surprising things.
Good problem to have, right, potentially, because it shows an increase, but yeah, I'm not sure you expected some of the things. That's trickled down to me even, like, and when they happen, at 3 o'clock on a Friday or something like that. But,
yes, they never happened at ideal times, obviously.
What is the biggest success, so you hope continues for this service as it grows or as it gets bigger? What are you most proud of? What should those who delivered this service be most proud of?
Yeah, well, I think that the chart that we showed way back at the beginning that showed the growth in ridership on a monthly basis, we rarely saw any setbacks in that, and I think that's, that just goes to confirm that the work that we were doing was making a difference and that people were actually taking advantage of the service, and that word-of-mouth component. I think we talked about, I would joke that it was 90% of the work that we were doing was promoting the service and trying to recruit people to try the service. And now it seems like that word of mouth, we're not having to do as much work because people are just telling their friends or family or employers about the service.
What's one thing you wish you had done differently?
Oh, boy.
Dave, same question for you, Dave.
You want to go first, Dave? Oh, man, I don't know. I mean, it's a pilot study, so there's going to be regrets, right? It's a brand new thing. There are going to be things where you'd say, man, I wish we would have done that differently. But you go into it with a lot of unknowns, so I couldn't pick one thing. I'm gonna cop out on that.
Sorry. You're not so lucky, Dave. You can answer that question. What's one learning you're going to take with you that you have to maybe be different this going forward in 2.0 versus 1.0?
What? Can you repeat the question?
What's one learning you're going to take? Say, yep, we got to do this differently in 2.0 versus 1.0. Let's say.
Yeah, it's a balance, right? I mean, right now we're providing a service that I think any one of us would probably want to use. I mean, it's essentially an Uber-type service, almost door-to-door, across a pretty far distance for a for free or $1.50. If somebody said, hey, Dave, you know, we'll give you a ride to work for that price, I'd say, yeah, sign me up. It's a balance between what's good for our flex riders and frankly, what we can afford to sustain and grow across the region. We don't do any there's so many pilots in this town that come and go, and they go poof and they're gone. We want this to last long beyond 2024. We want it to be, like I was saying earlier, we want it to be just part of the landscape of Milwaukee. So it's a balance between those things that we know are going to drive ridership and those things that are going to be, really expensive. So, I guess in terms of regrets, but it's not even really a regret because it was a Science Foundation grant that set up the pilot the way that it's set up. So, we're launching the new service on April 1st, 2023, although somebody reminded me that's April Fool's Day, so we're going to...
April 2nd, coming soon.
April 3rd, actually, which
April
I just
3rd.
looked at the calendar, is the Monday.
Okay.
Because, we don't want it to be, oh, well, Mobilize takes it over, and then now it's not, But when you're planning any kind of transportation program, and this is where I really lean on the expertise of Sewer PAC and members of our board and a lot of people up here on this stage, and in the audience, there's certain non-negotiables, right? We wanted to, we want to honor what the folks told us in the research, which was fast, reliable, safe, and that's a huge part, right? If it's not safe, it's not reliable, I'm not going to use it. Cost effectiveness, right? So how do we honor that with, a service that we can sustain?
No, that safety came through too, and in hearing some rider stories, like I didn't feel safe walking even the half block, or even 3 houses down to pick up a ride in the dark at 6 in the morning or so. Whatever. So yeah. A question for John and Allison, what is the cost of not expanding this? When you look at your areas, your employers, what is the cost of not doing this?
Well, I think
and not doing it well?
The first casualty is going to be employment, and then that just rolls into everything else. The investment in your community, the population and their investment in homes and the retail services that they purchase. So that'd be the first one. And then future job creation. Because again, like I said, we have prospects that are saying, we need this. So that'd be the first thing. One thing that would be a casualty for this not happening is the benefit that you're getting from this child care partnership.
Yep.
And, not only just the last mile, but it's kind of the last half mile and then the final half mile. There's a child care center on a prime corner in the Franklin Business Park, which surprised me because when you're planning that sort of a thing, that's not where you would put the child care center, but maybe we ought to start thinking about doing that.
What's the cost, Allison, of not doing this well or at all?
Well, I think it's twofold. We definitely have heard from our businesses and our employer in Waukesha County that their number one concern is workforce. And we want them to succeed. We want them to grow and prosper. And so we're trying to figure out what is our part to play in that so that they can succeed. And then I have another perspective, though, is that at least from a suburban transit perspective is COVID has really changed our transit. And I can see it's never going back exactly the way it was before. And so it's essential now. We have funding sources for these commuter routes that will never come back to where, just because folks are working remotely. And so I think the timing right now is essential because we need to pivot to answer different questions than, those commuter services were set up many years ago, and it was fulfilling that need, and the needs are changing. And for good or bad, I think because we're probably going to stop doing some commuter routes, we'll still have money that we won't have to raise new money to redirect to something. And so to have something in place that is credible, that has been vetted, that's being studied by a lot of folks, and for us in Waukesha County, we don't have any transit employees or experts. It's me, and I also see the airport, the roads, the buildings, you know, so transit gets a little piece of the business manager and I, and so it's essential for us to be included in a team like this that has all this depth of knowledge and expertise and can go around the country and look at all the best models, and so that they can share that with us, and we can go and then and share that with our county board and make that convincing argument.
You're saying there could be county money, though, in this, for this,
Potentially, yes.
in 2023?
Well, it is in our budget right now.
Awesome. I heard that. I just wanted to hear you say that. But, Neil, I have the same question for you, though. I wonder, the cost to the state of it's not being done well is a bad investment, I suppose. You're the most skin in the game right now of anyone here. So.
Yeah, Jeff alluded to it earlier. I think there's a lot of both employees and employers that kind of feel a bit scared and alone on how this is going to work. The businesses, you know, I work for state government, yes, but all my conversations are with corporations and businesses that are starving to try to figure out some of these puzzle pieces that they hadn't thought about before. So it's essential for Wisconsin to keep the companies that we have and to grow them, because one of the first questions they ask me is, sure, great, you can bring state incentives to the table, Neil, but how am I going to get my workforce there? Where's that going to come from? So even before they put a shovel in the ground, they want to know how they're going to be able to access it. So the success of FlexRide, I think, is paramount to the success of Wisconsin in this region.
So just two quick questions that will be done. This is one only for Dave right now. I want you to expand, Dave, in a second on the child care piece a little bit and how you're making decisions and so on. But before that, I'm going to plant the last seed because everyone's asking this next question. The last one is, think ahead to November 15th, 2020. Let's think ahead, 2 years from now. What does FlexRide 2.0 success look like from where you sit? Think about that while Dave talks about child care centers.
Just wanted to, am I on? Yeah. Just wanted to say no pressure, right, Neil? I mean, literally the success of the entire
the next question gives you 2 years. The next question gives you 2 years. But go ahead.
Yeah, so the early childhood component is key, and this is where we're stepping out of the box a little bit than we normally do in transportation circles. It's for me personally, it's kind of like going back to the future here, because my first half of my career at PAVE, working in K-12 education, so it's kind of good to connect those dots. But similar challenges in both those realms in many ways, different landscapes, but there are a lot of truly outstanding early childhood centers in the city of Milwaukee that are absolutely critical to our city's present and future. And many of them are really well situated from a transportation standpoint. They're on key bus routes. They're already hubs in their own way as community centers. And they serve a lot of working parents. We did look at the data for the grant. I don't have it right in front of me, but a very impressive percentage of workforce, folks that didn't come back after COVID into the workforce really was those twin barriers of transportation and childcare. And that just kind of makes intuitive sense, right? I mean, they're both very costly propositions. They're getting more expensive post-COVID. So it's really working with the early childhood centers, and we're doing that outreach, and really, and a lot of times, like these early childhood centers, like, what, transportation? Why are you talking to me? But when you explain to them, that your clientele, can use this to, really kind of help achieve more stable employment and better employment long term. I mean, that's really the pitch for
would that work of like FlexRide picks you up at your house, drops your kids off at childcare, drives you to work, drives you back to childcare and back home?
Yeah, totally possible.
How it could look.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, I don't want to make any promises here because, a lot of the details will be, ironed out in terms of the cost of that stuff. But that has been done in other cities, and obviously you're thinking about all kinds of issues with insurance and, the training of drivers, and of course having car seats in the car and all that kind of stuff. But, a lot of the child care centers we're looking at are on MCTS routes as well. So, maybe it is, the first leg of your journey is on, an MCTS bus to your child care center. But, the other part of being a workforce mobility hub as a child care center is the benefits then that flex riding parents can tap into, including assistance directly from Employ Milwaukee to help lower the cost of childcare. That's a big part of it.
So here's that last question I warned you about. So everyone gets this one, and then we'll hand it back to Bob to quickly close, and we'll be done for the day. But thank you for the opportunity to be part of this. Thank you for your attendance today as well, and being part of the expansion and the success so far of the pilot. Thank you to Claiborne for hosting us too. And then how about a round of applause for Claiborne Benson and Black Historical Society. Eric, what does success look like in your world 2 years from today?
Well,
sleep, yeah.
Oh, I'll sleep when I'm dead. No, I think what I would look for is what Dave and I are working on right now is a sustainable funding model, a sustainable governance model, something that's well integrated with the transit systems that we have today, that's regionally focused, not just looking at Milwaukee County's needs, not just looking at Waukesha County's needs, but a true partnership, and I think that's possible. And then responsive to employers' needs, continuing to adapt to possible improvements in the service design, as well as responsive to the individual employees' needs, the riders' needs. So,
I'll put Dave.
A program that is so well used and so proven that most of the riders and most people in the public don't even know who started it or why or even when it was started. I mean, when did the Milwaukee bus start running, right? I mean, it's just like always been there. It just is as an essential part of the community. So, maybe within 2 years, it might be a little bit ambitious to get to that point, but at least we're, pointed in that direction.
Sure.
I guess, long-term sustainable system, which requires some pivoting as it evolves, between, the last mile and some other evolving mass transit or rapid transit systems. And, incorporating that child care, which serves equity. The last scenario you just described is an equity issue. And then, and supporting those employers and creating those jobs. That seems to be the whole mission.
Yeah, I can see, 2 years and beyond, a regional approach, right? Where the borders of your city or your county aren't as important. And also, I mean, other uses in addition to workforce, right? Paratransit possibly as an option. We see Green Bay doing that. As a complement to fixed route service. And so, we have to open up, to new possibilities. I mean, this is not the 1990s, where funding is, coming in, at the rate it was. But yes, we will continue, to fight for more funding for all kinds of transit.
Allison, Neil.
I think success looks like all of these partners still here. More partners have joined. Our ridership on FlexRide continues to increase exponentially as it has, and that our Waukesha County employers see it as a competitive advantage to participate in the FlexRide program. That would be a great success.
So Claiborne success, where you went, looks like us being back here in 2 years. I'll book it now. But go ahead, last point, and again.
I don't want to put a lot of pressure. I have a list of about 15 things, but I'll keep it low. But I just want to normalize FlexRide to the point where there's business testimonials that we can use to talk to businesses about trusting in this system and assuring that their tens of millions of dollars that they want to invest in the future of this region is going to be a wise one because they have partners.
Well put. Thank you. Can I have a round of applause for our panel? Bob, the stage is yours.
All right, thank you so much. Thanks, Eric, for the final panelists. Thanks, everybody, for being here this afternoon, taking time out of your days to really talk and reflect on this FlexRide Milwaukee service that is connecting workers and jobs. And it's really meaning something to the people who take it. And so you being a part of this conversation is continuing that and building it for the future. So thanks again to Claiborne for hosting us. Thanks again to Eric Brooks and Eric Lind for all their help getting this event together. It's definitely hard to run a transit service. It's also hard to set up a hybrid meeting. So thanks for getting through the technical challenges of that. Please stay tuned for the academic research that's going to be coming out of our continued work through this grant, as well as for the people who are doing other academic research on this across the country. Please keep listening to the employers and employees as we continue with the service. With that, thanks again. Be safe. Have a great evening.